Hey guys, tonight we're headed somewhere a little colder, a lot smellier, and possibly more fun than you'd have picked. Straight into the heart of a medieval village at Christmastime. It's muddy, it's smoky, and it's full of strange traditions involving fire, ale, and bread that could break your jaw. Honestly, you probably won't survive this. Between the diseases, the frostbite, and the chance of being trampled by a wassailing mob, your odds aren't great, but at least you'll be going down in good company, with peasants in patched cloaks, pigs underfoot, and a holiday spirit that's equal parts piety and party. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love knowing who's out there in the dark with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing just outside the edge of a village, not a modern one with tidy postboxes and plastic Santas, but one made of wattle and daub, animal pens and rickety timber. It's the early 1300s, give or take. The wind is sharp, smelling of ash and sheep and cold iron, and the first snow has started to fall, fat flakes tumbling onto the thatched rooftops and clinging to your hood. The entire landscape is painted in shades of brown and grey, with patches of white where the frost has started to win. The forest looms just beyond the fields, full of things that creak and snap and howl. It's late November, which means Advent has officially begun. For the next few weeks, no meat, no loud parties, and no weddings. The church bell tolls softly, calling villagers to prayer. You're expected to fast. Though, to be fair, most people are already eating like it's a permanent fast because food's tight this time of the year. The last of the onions are sprouting beards, and your best bet for fresh produce is the occasional mushroom or stubborn root yanked from under the snow. People here measure time differently than you do. It's not November or December, it's St. Catherine's Day, St. Andrew's Eve, the first Sunday of Advent. Every event on the calendar is wrapped around a saint or a holy feast, and today is no exception. Children run past you, wool caps flopping, their cheeks red from the cold. One of them slips and goes down in the mud, but he's up again, laughing, already chasing his sister. Their dog, a shaggy thing that might actually be part goat, barks after them. The village isn't silent, but it's quiet in a way that settles into your chest. You hear the soft rhythmic clack of a woman weaving on a narrow loom inside one of the cottages. Somewhere nearby, the slow scrape of a saw through wet wood. Firelight flickers behind stretched pig bladder windows, turning the entire place into a breathing, glowing nest. And overhead, smoke rises from each chimney in lazy ribbons, curling into the darkening sky. You duck inside a cottage to warm up. The door is a rough plank, and it groans as you push it open. Inside, the air is thick with heat and smoke, and the unmistakable smell of wet wool, garlic, and stew. A family is gathered around the hearth, where a pot of something vaguely edible simmers. You can't tell if it's turnip or just hope. A child hands you a carved wooden cup of warm beer. It's sour and flat and perfect. The villagers are poor, sure, but they're not joyless. Their lives are woven tightly with the rhythm of the seasons, and even the dead of winter brings its rituals, its excuses for celebration. In fact, the darker the night, the brighter the traditions, else. That's why, even now, the corners of the room are already decorated for the season. Not with ornaments or lights, but with holly branches, yew sprigs, and old bits of ribbon saved from years before. The greenery isn't just for beauty, it's a little bit of magic, a charm to keep out what walks when the sun is weakest. One of the older men pulls out a battered recorder and starts to play something soft and wheezy. The others hum along. A girl, maybe 14, starts braiding together dried herbs into a garland. You notice she's adding tiny bones to it, not human, you hope. When you ask what it's for, she shrugs, keeps the ghosts quiet. This isn't the Christmas you know. There's no fir tree in the corner or glowing reindeer on the roof, no gift-wrapped boxes or sugary cookies. But make no mistake, the spirit is here. It's just deeper, older, rooted in a time when the line between Christian and pagan wasn't so clearly drawn. You step outside again, snow crunching beneath your boots. Across the way, the blacksmith's forge roars like a dragon. Inside, the smith is pounding out something festive, a wrought iron star for the church door maybe, or a new horseshoe for the Lord of Misrule's costumed parade. You'll meet him soon enough. As night falls fully, you spot more villagers emerging from their homes, bundled up against the cold. There's a slow gathering in the village square. Someone has brought out a Yule log, a massive chunk of wood, too big for any one person to carry. It's been soaking in wine and herbs for days. Soon it will be lit, not just for warmth, but to drive away bad luck for the coming year. They believe the log must burn for the full 12 days of Christmas. If it goes out early, well, don't ask. Nearby, a huddle of children are whispering about Krampus. Yes, that Krampus, though here he's more like a frost spirit who eats your bread and leaves goat tracks by the door if you've been lazy. One boy insists he saw him last year. The others shiver and giggle, unconvinced but still glancing over their shoulders. As you stand there, breath fogging, your hands buried deep in your cloak, you feel it. That tingle at the base of your neck. The combination of fear, magic and anticipation. Christmas is coming. Not just as a feast day, but as a full season transformation. The ordinary will bend just a little into the extraordinary. And you're about to witness all of it. By the time the second week of Advent arrives, your stomach has learned not to expect much. The rules are clear. No meat, no parties, and definitely no giving into gluttony or wild impulses. This is supposed to be a time of reflection, restraint, and spiritual readiness. Of course, most people in the village are already halfway to ascetic monks just by necessity. What's one more boiled root in the pot? Still, wassail. Advent brings its own kind of hush, like the entire village is holding its breath under a quilt of frost and tradition. You wake to the soft toll of the bell from the church. It's not a grand cathedral bell, but it's loud enough to rattle your teeth in the chill air. You wrap your cloak tighter around your shoulders and make your way toward the chapel, following other hunched figures moving through the fog like ghosts. Everyone is bundled in layers of wool, fur, or whatever scraps they can stitch together. There's a girl wearing sleeves that were clearly once part of a sack, but someone's embroidered them with careful lopsided crosses. Nothing is wasted. Not time, not cloth, not hope. Inside the church, the cold follows you. There's no real heating, of course, just the combined warmth of dozens of bodies pressed together in a stone box. The priest is already up at the front, his breath visible with each blessing. Candles line the altar, flickering in protest at every draught. You find a spot near the back, leaning against the wall where someone scrawled a crude picture of a donkey beside the Latin for "be watchful." The sermon is long and mumbled, filled with talk of sin, waiting, and the coming light. You catch only every third word, not because you're inattentive, but because the Latin is thick and the echoes blur everything. Still, you know the rhythm. This is the quiet before the joy. It's meant to be hard. The feasting will come, but only if you've earned it. Once Mass is over, everyone trickles out into the square, blinking against the flat grey sky. No one talks much today. There's a kind of communal understanding that this is the lean part of the season, not just in food, but in spirit. You find yourself joining the others at the village well, where someone's tied little sprigs of rosemary and lavender on the handle. There's a small rebellion against the monotony, a whispered promise that greenery will return. That afternoon you spend time in the longhouse helping to stir ale. More like supervised hovering, really. The brew mistress, a squat woman with arms like hams, lets you add herbs to the pot. Mugwort, maybe a bit of honey if the bees were generous this year. This is preparation too. Come Christmas, the ale will be poured generously, and the better it tastes, the louder the singing will be. For now, though, it sits in heavy oak barrels under a blanket of damp cloth, fermenting in the gloom. Out behind the homes, the fields are brittle and dead. The last of the sheep huddle together near their wooden shelter, thick with wool and attitude. A pair of boys are arguing over who gets to carry in firewood tonight, which is less about the task and more about not wanting to go alone into the woods near dusk. The trees are still full of stories, some sacred, some not. The forest is never just a forest here. Later that evening, you're invited into a home to help prepare something called plum pottage, which, spoiler alert, has very little to do with plums and only a vague resemblance to anything you'd call edible. It's a thick, dark sludge of dried fruits, spices and grains, meant to be stored and slowly warmed over the coming weeks. The woman making it jokes that it can kill or cure, depending on how long you cook it. You laugh. But the smell is oddly comforting, like cloves and cinnamon, and something just on the edge of rotting. After dinner, which is mostly broth and stale bread softened in the broth, the family begins lighting candles, not for decoration, but as part of a daily ritual. Each night, one more candle is lit as they count down toward Christmas. They sing softly in a language that's half Latin, half local dialect, and you're not sure where the hymn ends and the lullaby begins. The youngest child, a boy with wild curls and missing teeth, falls asleep with a candle stub in his hand. No one bothers to take it away. Fire, after all, is a friend in this season. Outside, the air has turned colder. The stars are sharp tonight, hanging above the village like the nails on heaven's door. You walk slowly, hands deep in your sleeves, boots crunching the frost. At the edge of the village, you pass a small shrine. Just a carved stone under a twisted tree decorated with bits of ribbon and a few coins. Not Christian, not exactly. You ask about it the next morning and the blacksmith shrugs. Old spirits don't mind waiting, he says. They've had the practice. And this is part of what makes Advent so strange here. It's both holy and haunting. A season not just of waiting for Christ, but of sitting quietly with all the other things that live in winter's long dark. Some people fast out of faith, some out of famine, but all of them fast together. Even the goats seem to bleat with less enthusiasm. The scholars today still debate how strictly these fasts were observed. Some accounts describe whole villages obeying the rules with monk-like devotion. Others suggest plenty of secret feasting behind closed doors, especially among the wealthier households. Maybe it was a bit of both. Maybe it depended on how close your cottage was to the manor, or how loudly your stomach growled during a prayer. But in the small villages like this one, what seems clear is the collective sense of rhythm. Everyone slows down. Everyone braces for something, maybe a miracle, maybe just the first real snowfall. Either way, the mood is a little heavier, a little more inward. This is the hush before the chorus, and you're starting to feel it in your bones, in the way even laughter sounds softer now, like the village is whispering to itself. By the third week of Advent, something begins to shift. Not loudly, not with fanfare, but like a quiet stirring beneath the ice. The village is still gripped by winter, but there's a tension in the air, the kind that prickles your skin just before a thunderstorm or a kiss. It's still technically the season of restraint, but people are starting to cheat just a little. You notice the loaves of bread getting a bit fatter, the ale tasting just a touch sweeter, the songs drifting through open windows sounding suspiciously like carols. You wake up to smoke already in the air, thicker than usual, a sure sign that baking has begun in earnest. And not just the hard rye bricks of day-to-day survival, but soft, eggy loaves braided with dried fruits and honey. If you're lucky, you'll get a piece. If you're really lucky, your slice won't contain a surprise rock-hard raisin that cracks a tooth. Villagers bake in communal ovens, a habit born of necessity and tight space. It's an all-day affair. You wander over to the oven house where half the village seems to be gathered, arguing over whose loaf is whose, poking at dough with fingers dusted in ash. Inside, the heat is staggering. It's the warmest place you've been since this whole thing began. You sit back against the wall, sweat prickling under your cloak, as women shove long wooden paddles into the roaring mouths of brick ovens. A few of the loaves are stamped with crosses or suns or simple faces, symbols of blessing or just habit. One woman confides that she hides sprigs of sage in the dough, not for flavour. To keep out the bad air, she says with a wink. Later in the afternoon, you join a group trudging through the snow-laced forest to gather kindling and greenery. It's technically a chore, but it feels more like a ritual. They know what to look for. Holly, ivy, rosemary if it hasn't died off. Anything green is a treasure this time of year. You watch as one man plucks a twisted branch of mistletoe from a tree using a hooked stick. It falls into the snow, and everyone steps back. There's a beat of silence, then a chuckle. No kissing till after Mass, someone jokes, and the mood lightens. Back in the village, people begin hanging the greenery above doorways, on hearths, in windows. Holly for protection, ivy for rebirth. The symbolism is thick, like butter you wish you had. The decorations aren't just for show, they're warding spells dressed up as tradition. You're told to never bring holly inside before Christmas Eve, though. That would invite bad luck or angry spirits, or worse, the hens stopping their eggs. Even the poorest cottages get dressed up somehow. Someone wraps a cracked jug in a faded ribbon. Another paints a star on the side of their door with white clay. There's no such thing as too small an offering when the nights are this long. As one old man mutters while arranging twigs in a cross shape above his barn, "Light in, dark out, that's the trick." By evening, the whole village smells like smoke, yeast and pine sap. Sharp, comforting, a little overwhelming. Inside one cottage, a young couple is repairing an old string of bells meant to hang from the oxen's yoke on Christmas morning. They jingle softly as they work. One of them sings under their breath, something low and lilting, in a language you can't quite place. You hum along anyway. It doesn't feel like intrusion, it feels like being folded into something older than you are. You notice too that the animals seem restless. The dogs bark at empty corners. The goats refuse to go into their pens. Even the chickens are fussy, clucking and flapping, as if they've heard rumours of coming chaos. The villagers mutter that animals can sense spirits. You don't laugh, not here, not now. As night falls, the first real cold snaps in. Your breath freezes almost before it leaves your mouth. The moon is thin and sharp overhead, and the stars hang low, like they've moved in closer for the season. You bundle up and head to the edge of the village where someone started a bonfire. Probably an excuse to gather and gossip, but no one's complaining. They tell stories around the flames. Not just Bible tales, but the strange ones too, about wandering lights in the fields, about a man who met the Virgin Mary disguised as a washerwoman, about wolves that can speak Latin but only after midnight. A boy beside you pipes up with a local legend. Says there's a spectral horse that roams the roads this time of the year, all rib and bone and eyes like lanterns. He calls it Yule Mare, always, and it taps on windows demanding entry and riddles. If you answer wrong, it curses your bread to mould. If you answer right, it leaves you a coin and the scent of lavender. No one knows where the story started, but everyone's heard it. It's around this fire that you hear your first whispers of the Lord of Misrule. Apparently soon someone in the village, usually a servant or even a child, will be chosen to rule over Christmas. They'll lead the feasts, make silly decrees, and generally turn order on its head. It's meant to echo Saturnalia, that ancient Roman festival of reversal. One of the older women laughs and says last year the butcher's apprentice was crowned and made everyone eat breakfast for supper and speak only in rhymes for a day. The priest hated it, which means it was a roaring success. You head home with a belly half full of bread and gossip. The snow squeaks under your boots, and the wind has teeth again. You pass by a window glowing softly with firelight. Inside, a family is kneeling together, heads bowed. They're praying, yes, but you notice too the way the children peek out from under their lashes, watching the door, the fire, the shadows, as if something might enter, or already has. Scholars still argue whether medieval villagers truly believed in all these superstitions, or if they were just inherited customs acted out more from habit than fear. But here, standing in the deep cold with the taste of smoke and bread still on your tongue, it doesn't really matter. The belief is in the doing, in every sprig of greenery, every whispered tale, every candle lit against the night. And so the quiet preparations continue. Not just for the birth of Christ, but for everything else that comes with winter's threshold. The laughter, the hunger, the strange dreams, the deep-rooted hope that the sun will return. That warmth will find you again. By the time the sun rolls sluggishly into the sky on the final Sunday before Christmas, the village feels different, brighter, busier, and a little mischievous, like it's trying to hold a secret behind its back. The Advent hush hasn't completely lifted, but it's definitely loosened its grip. There's more laughter in the air now, rising above the clatter of hooves and boots on frozen ground. The smoke from hearths is thicker, richer. Even the dogs seem less suspicious and more likely to nap near your feet than bark at shadows. You step outside your borrowed cottage to find the village square bustling with life. The centrepiece? A wagon load of greenery pulled in from the woods, its cart draped with ivy and pine boughs that dust the ground with needles as they sway. Children swarm around it, plucking branches to stuff into their belts or hair. One boy's made himself a holly crown and struts like a prince, though he's missing one shoe and the other's on backward. Villagers begin decorating in earnest, not with glass ornaments or plastic tinsel, but with whatever nature and last year's stash can offer. A woman carefully hangs a garland made of dried apples and little cloth bundles filled with rosemary. A man tacks sprigs of holly above the inn door, while muttering a rhyme under his breath. Half prayer, half charm. Everything they place has a purpose, protection, blessing, luck. You quickly learn not to touch anything hanging over a doorway without asking. One woman practically tackles a child who reached for her ash and hawthorn cross. That's to keep the bad ones out, she snaps. You want to open the door to things that walk backwards? Inside homes, greenery is tucked around rafters and mantels. Ivy curls over window frames like it grew there overnight. Notably absent, however, are pine trees. There's no Christmas tree. Not yet, not here. That's a much later tradition. Instead, the heart of holiday decoration is the hearth, where flames crackle under great black cauldrons, and children sleep with their toes dangerously close to catching fire. The Yule log makes its grand appearance today too. Not just one, but many depending on the home. These aren't the tidy fireplace-sized logs you might be picturing. Some of them are half a tree dragged in with a great ceremony, and laid across the fire pit with the reverence of a holy relic. The log is supposed to burn for all 12 days of Christmas. If it goes out early, it's a sign, a bad one. Of what? That depends who you ask. Crops will fail, cows won't breed, your teeth will fall out, your wife will leave you for the reeve. The list is long and personalised. You help carry one log into a widow's home. It takes 4 people and a fair amount of slipping and swearing. The log is sticky with pitch and wrapped in red ribbon that someone's clearly reused for the past 5 years. Before it's laid in the hearth, the woman dabs a bit of ale on it, muttering something about last year's fire burning clean and quiet. No one comments, no one laughs. When she turns away, you notice a small pouch of herbs tied beneath her apron. While the log smoulders, the scent of pine and ash mixing with baking bread, the village priest makes his rounds. He doesn't bless every home, just the ones that ask. Not everyone is strictly obedient when it comes to the church's preferences about pagan nonsense. He mostly nods at the greenery with tight lips, probably saving his real lectures for midnight mass. He does stop to chat with a man who's carved a wooden star to hang above his stable. It's a Bethlehem star, the man insists quickly, before the priest can object. Not anything else. They share a stiff smile and the priest moves on, muttering about superstition and the usual goat-headed trouble. That goat thing, you hear more about it later, from a girl who swears her grandmother used to dress up as a creature called the Yule goat and knock on people's doors demanding offerings. If you gave her bread, she'd bless your household. If not, she'd curse your butter to spoil. She had horns and everything, the girl says proudly, and she'd butt you if you got cheeky. No one seems quite sure whether this was tradition, or just Grandma getting creative with her boredom. After sundown, the entire village glows. Not with electricity, of course, but with candles in nearly every window. They're placed in hollowed turnips, or little clay holders shaped like suns or stars. The idea is to welcome light, draw it in, and remind the darkness that it's not winning. You walk past one cottage where the candle is surrounded by small stones, each etched with a name. The family inside tells you they light a candle for every ancestor they can name, and place their stones by it to keep them close for the season. They visit, the father says casually, sometimes just in dreams. Outside the alehouse, a group of men gather under a lantern, hanging up garlands and telling jokes that get louder with each swig of what smells like very strong cider. A small pig wanders among them, wearing a red ribbon and rooting in the slush for drop bits. One of the men offers it a dried apple tied to a stick. Pig gets the first gift, Mig says, so the rest of us have enough. Superstition. Yes, but also insurance. That pig's probably feeding someone come New Year. In one corner of the village, you pass a home where the decorations are off. Nothing green, no candles, no garlands, just a row of shoes turned upside down by the door and a bundle of sticks hung in silence above the threshold. You don't ask, no one does, but the rest of the village gives that house a wide berth. Later, someone whispers that they lost a child last winter. This year, they're leaving space for the spirit. As the night deepens, a soft snow begins to fall, catching in the flicker of candlelight and turning the entire village into a living painting. Frosted roofs, glowing windows, laughter in the distance, and the distant clink of bells tied to a goat's collar. The quiet is no longer empty. It's full of brimming with expectation, with the hush of something ancient about to stir. One scholar once suggested that medieval villagers didn't celebrate Christmas the way we think of it now, not as a single day of joy, but as a build-up, a transition, a thin place where the sacred and the seasonal collide. And standing here, boots soaked, heart thudding a little harder than it should, you begin to understand this isn't a holiday, it's a threshold, and you've just stepped through it. By the time the solstice draws near, the village can hardly pretend to be solemn anymore. The fast is still technically on, the prayers still murmured dutifully, but there's a glint in every eye that says mischief is brewing. And today is the day it officially boils over, because this morning, with bells that sound just slightly more cheerful than usual, the village wakes to the crowning of the Lord of Misrule. You stumble into the square just in time to see the chosen noble paraded through the village on a rickety cart pulled by 2 boys and one very stubborn sheep. He's covered in mismatched robes, one sleeve is velvet, the other burlap, and he's wearing a crooked paper crown held together by beeswax and string. His cheeks are flushed, possibly from excitement, possibly from cider. The crowd roars with laughter as he waves a wooden scepter carved from a broom handle, shouting nonsense decrees like, "All chickens shall be addressed as lady for the day," and "Any man seen frowning must dance with a goose." He's a baker's apprentice, maybe 14, and already drunk with power and probably also just drunk. But that's the whole point. For one glorious stretch of days, the world turns upside down, the lowly become rulers, rules bend until they nearly break. It's a celebration of chaos before order reasserts itself with a vengeance. Saturnalia reborn, but with frostbitten fingers and terrible ale. Villagers gather around, clapping and jeering good-naturedly. The village reeve, who normally takes everything very seriously, is grinning through gritted teeth as the Lord of Misrule pelts him with snow and declares him official turnip inspector. Even the priest is present, arms folded, face tight, probably muttering 1,000 internal disapprovals per minute. He can't stop the tradition. It's older than most of the buildings in town, but he can certainly pray louder the next day. You fall in beside the crowd as they follow the Lord of Misrule through the village on his royal nonsense procession. At each home he makes absurd demands, 3 pickled eggs and a dance, or a pig in slippers. Most people are ready for him. One household hands over a turnip carved into a goblet. Another produces a chicken wearing a scarf. The laughter is half joy, half relief. The darkness is still pressing in from the edges of the world, but here in this ridiculous little parade it's kept at bay for a while. Later in the square he takes his throne, a barrel draped in blankets, and oversees games of absurdity. There's a contest to balance bread loaves on your head while skipping. Someone suggests a poetry duel. One old man insists on challenging the children to an onion-eating race. Someone brings a ferret. It's unclear why, no one questions it. The Lord of Misrule is, for today and a few days more, the heartbeat of the village. He makes the rules, breaks them, and makes them again. His reign is short but vivid, like a candle flaring up before it dies out. And when you sit down near the fire and watch him cackle with glee while forcing 2 dignified grandmothers to compete in a beat toss, you feel something stir in your chest. Not just amusement, but something deeper. This isn't just silliness, it's survival. Inverting the world gives people a break from how heavy it usually is. As the sky darkens and the bonfires rise again, music starts. Real music. Pipes and drums and an out-of-tune fiddle dragged out of someone's attic. The dancing begins, and with it the misrule deepens. Partners spin and trip, dogs bark and join in, and somewhere in the chaos, a loaf of bread is used as a percussion instrument. The stars wheel overhead distant and bright, and for a moment, the village is the centre of the universe. You find yourself dancing with a woman who claims she once saw the Pope in a dream, and he told her to grow more cabbage. She spins you until your legs forget they belong to you, and when the music ends, she kisses your cheek and tells you to sleep with salt in your pocket. Keeps out the night walkers, she whispers, and skips away cackling. Later, when the fire is mostly ash and the revellers are down to muttered jokes and leaning heavily on each other, the Lord of Misrule sits back on his barrel, crown slipping sideways, and declares, "Let the chickens view." Someone throws him a boiled egg in tribute. He catches it like a king and bites it in half without blinking. The crowd erupts in laughter. You finally slip away into the cold lungs full of smoke and merriment. The night feels thinner somehow, more transparent. The trees at the edge of the village sway gently like they have been watching. You half expect to see something peering between the trunks. A ghost, a god, a goat in clerical robes, but nothing stirs. And still, that sense lingers, that this holiday isn't just a Christian one, or a pagan one, or even just a human one. It's something primal, a time when the world inverts so that it can reset. When the poorest boy can rule, the animals might speak, and the border between the sacred and the absurd is laughably thin. Scholars debate the true origin of the Lord of Misrule, whether it's directly descended from Roman Saturnalia, or if it arose organically across cultures craving release in the dark months. But here in the mud and laughter and firelight, it hardly matters. What matters is that for a brief time the cold and hunger and drudgery take a backseat to joy, ridiculousness, and a very wobbly crown. You climb into bed that night, the scent of smoke still clinging to your clothes, the echoes of laughter ringing in your ears. And as you drift off, you dream not of kings or saints, but of chickens wearing boots and dancing pigs, and the sound of a boy shouting, "Bring me the pickled eels, I must knight the goose. The first real feast of the season sneaks up on you like a slow-boiling cauldron, quiet at first, then suddenly roaring. After weeks of restraint, fasting and broth so thin it could legally be considered water, the villagers are ready. And not just ready, ravenous. The kind of hungry that makes turnip stew look gourmet and makes even the rats nervous. The air is heavy with smoke and roasting meat, a scent that hits you square in the face the moment you step outside. Your stomach groans like an old church door. It's Christmas Eve, technically still a fasting day, but let's just say some interpretations of that rule are flexible, especially if you happen to be invited to the manor house, which today somehow you are. The manor is at the far end of the village, perched slightly uphill like it's judging everyone. Built of stone and smugness, it's home to the local lord, well-fed, well-dressed, and probably not great at empathy. But to his credit, he's throwing open his doors this evening for the annual feast. Not out of generosity, of course. It's tradition, a sort of noblesse oblige mixed with performative kindness. Feed the peasants once a year, and maybe they'll complain slightly less about the taxes and the tithes. You arrive just as the servants are herding villagers into the great hall, which smells like meat, hay, wax, and the unmistakable scent of people who've been wearing the same wool for 3 weeks. Long trestle tables stretch from wall to wall, already lined with trenchers, thick slabs of stale bread that double as plates. No one sits yet. First comes the entrance of the food. It's not just about eating, it's about seeing what you're going to eat. Presentation is everything, especially when half the village will be gossiping about it until next year. And then it arrives, the centerpiece of the feast, the thing of legends, carried in on a wooden tray by 2 red-faced kitchen boys. A roasted boar's head, its mouth stuffed with apples and cloves. Tusks polished to a dull gleam. The head is more symbolic than practical. It's meant to impress, not feed. But it works. Gasps echo around the hall. A few children actually bow. Behind it comes a parade of dishes, each more suspicious than the last. There are pigeons wrapped in pastry, eel pie with a decorative crust, thick pottages flecked with unidentifiable herbs, and something that might be a swan, or might be a goose with dreams of grandeur. One plate holds roasted hedgehogs curled into perfect spiny balls, their feet still attached like an afterthought. You raise an eyebrow, someone nearby shrugs. "Crunchy on the outside," he says, "if you don't mind the squeak." Bread and ale appear in abundance. The ale is warm and spiced, heavy with honey, and possibly something medicinal, judging by the way your toes tingle after 2 mugs. Servants ladle out stew with generous hands, and for a few blissful hours, no one is counting beans. Plates are filled, emptied, filled again. Children are allowed to sit at the edge of the tables, where they eat with both hands like wildlings. Someone sings, someone else falls off a bench, the dogs underfoot eat better than most people have all month. You're wedged between a blacksmith and a woman who smells faintly of onions, and fiercely defends the superiority of oat pudding over barley. She offers you a spoonful of something dark and gluey. "Try it," she insists, made with suet, dried plums, and a splash of mercy. You do, and it's confusing. Sweet and savoury, warm and slightly alarming. You nod politely and pretend your eyes aren't watering. At the head table, the Lord raises a cup and offers a toast, slurring just enough to suggest he's been celebrating since noon. His wife sits beside him, wearing a wimple that looks like it could double as a sail. They nod graciously as the room erupts in toasts and laughter. The Lord of Misrule, still proudly wearing his crooked crown, jumps onto the bench and demands a song. A group obliges with a slightly off-key carol that features a suspicious number of verses about ale. As the night deepens and the fire blazes higher in the hearth, more strange delicacies appear. There's a pie the size of a hatbox that contains, surprise, another pie inside. Someone produces what they swear is a candied fish. It smells like defeat and ambition. A few brave souls try it anyway, and immediately regret everything. Somewhere near midnight, a man in a tunic embroidered with tiny suns announces that he has brought a miracle loaf. It's supposed to never go mouldy and, if buried properly, will ensure your next child is born with strong teeth. Everyone nods solemnly. No one eats it. Instead, it's placed on the mantel next to a carving of St. Nicholas holding a tiny goat. You eventually stagger outside for air, belly round and aching, heart strangely light. The stars are out again, brighter than ever, clustered like frost on black velvet. The manor house behind you pulses with light and noise. For one night the divisions soften. The poor eat like the rich, or at least like the reasonably well-off, and for all the weirdness of hedgehog pie and miracle loaves, there's something touching about the whole thing, a community feasting together, pretending, if only briefly, that the world is fair and warm and full. Of course, not every village feast was like this. Scholars note that in many cases, only the wealthiest households could afford the full boar's head treatment. Most villagers celebrated in smaller ways, maybe roasting a goose if they were lucky, or preparing a special pottage with a rare spice scraped from the bottom of a borrowed pouch. Some places banned feasting altogether during certain Advent periods. Others partied like it was their last winter, which honestly, for many it could be. But here, tonight, in this sleepy village tucked between hills and myths, the feast is very real, and you, outsider or not, are part of it. Fed, full, and wrapped in the golden haze of firelight and fermentation, you find yourself smiling for no particular reason. Just warmth, just life. By the next morning, the feast has settled into everyone's bones like warmth in deep earth. The village is groggy, slower than usual, and smells faintly of leftover grease, smoke, and a few questionable choices. Even the roosters seem hesitant to crow, but there's no time for a proper recovery, because today marks a tradition that's equal parts drinking, singing, and ancient tree worship disguised as good cheer. Wassailing. You're pulled from your warm corner of sleep by a knock on the door, then another, louder and more rhythmically chaotic. You open it to find a gaggle of villagers, already grinning and slightly pink-cheeked, holding mugs and what appears to be a large bowl of floating apples. "Wassail!" they shout in near unison a little too loudly. "Wassail, and open up before we freeze our bits off, you're barely awake." But someone thrusts a cup into your hand. It's warm, fragrant, and suspiciously strong for this early in the day. Ale, spices, maybe roasted crab apples bobbing around for texture and luck. The first sip burns a little, in a good way. It tastes like holiday chaos, cinnamon, cloves, something vaguely medicinal and a note of "we're not sober again till 12th night." The crowd outside is not just drinking for fun. This is wassailing, tradition that blends singing, blessing, and low-key extortion. The rules are simple. Travel house to house in a group, sing loudly and preferably in tune, though no one's strict, and demand drink or treats in exchange for songs and goodwill. If people are generous, their household is blessed for the coming year. If they aren't, well, there's usually some mild hexing involved. A loaf of bread goes missing. Someone draws a chicken on your door in chalk. Nothing serious, probably. You join the procession. There are jugs being passed around with increasing urgency, and everyone's already forgotten the lyrics to the second verse of the carol they're halfway through. One man improvises with lines about pickled eggs and dancing pigs. It works. People laugh. The next house opens its door and more cups are filled. The best stop, however, is not a house. It's an orchard. The group veers off down a frost-covered path, boots crunching through icy leaves, until you reach a crooked grove of gnarled apple trees. Here the tone changes, voices lower. A jug of the strongest wassail is passed around, and then the serious ritual begins. It's time to toast the trees. You watch as the villagers circle the oldest apple tree. One of its branches bowed like an old man's back, its bark rough and dark with age. A woman steps forward and dips a piece of bread in the wassail, then places it carefully in a fork of the tree. "For the robin," someone explains. He guards the orchard. Then they all raise their mugs and shout into the cold, "Wassail, apple tree, bear fruit and be merry." And then, because this is a proper ceremony, they proceed to bang on pots, clang spoons, and shout at the tree like they're scolding it for misbehaviour. You're told the noise is meant to wake the spirit of the tree, to scare away any demons or bad luck still clinging to the branches. It's chaotic, joyful, and just slightly eerie. The trees, silent and skeletal in the frost, seem to listen. Somewhere in the middle of it, a boy climbs into one of the trees and starts singing. Not a carol, something older, wordless and strange. His voice is high and clear, and for a moment the orchard is still. The song ends as quickly as it began, and then everyone is shouting again, toasting the next tree, flinging cider into the roots like an offering. When the last cup is drained and the last chant mumbled, the group staggers back toward the village. Spirits are high, faces are flushed, the ritual is complete, the trees have been honoured, the cider has been sacrificed, the robins, presumably, are pleased. You pass a pair of older women sitting near the fire pit outside the alehouse. They are watching the returning wassailers with expressions halfway between amusement and long-suffering endurance. One of them looks at you and says, "In my grandmother's day, they used to wear tree bark and crow feathers when they did it." Called it dressing as the orchard's ghost. Her companion grunts. Now they just wear too much ale. Back inside, someone started singing again, and a few children are collecting crusts and dried fruit from the kitchen to feed the spirits, which apparently means leaving small offerings in odd places around the house. The windowsill, the hearth, the loft beam. You don't ask too many questions. One boy tells you solemnly, if you feed them, they won't pull your blankets off. It's not clear if he's talking about fairies, saints, or just his sister. Evening falls again with its usual weight. The fire is stoked, the air thick with smoke and steam and the ghost of 100 apples. Outside, the snow begins to fall, gentle, steady, covering everything in clean lines and soft curves. You sit near the hearth, mug in hand, and watch as the Lord of Misrule leads a song from the corner, his paper crown now partially melted from an unfortunate incident involving a candle and too much enthusiasm. Historians still argue over the exact origins of wassailing. Was it a form of pagan tree worship co-opted by Christianity? A farmer's plea for fertility? A social custom turned festive drinking game? Maybe all of the above. Like most things in medieval life, it wasn't about neat categories. It was about what worked. And clearly, the trees, the people, and the cider all agreed. You sleep that night beneath heavy blankets, full of hot drink and the faint taste of wood smoke. In your dreams, the apple trees whisper songs and the robins wink knowingly as they peck at bits of bread left in frost-crusted branches. Somewhere in the distance, someone bangs a pot and yells at the moon. Everything is just as it should be. Morning drags its feet today, as if it too stayed up too late singing about wassail and robins. The sun, weak and reluctant, barely pierces the low clouds as the village stirs. But today isn't about cider or bread or shouting at trees. Today is for stories, the kind that echo from the chapel steps to the darkest corners of the barn. You don't need a stage or even a script. All you need is a stable floor, a rickety wooden mask, and a handful of villagers willing to play angels, devils, and maybe a talking donkey or two. Welcome to the delightful chaos of mystery plays. By mid-morning, the preparations have already begun. You follow the sound of hammering to a spot just outside the church, where a raised wooden platform is being constructed from planks, barrels, and what might be an old door. It's crooked, it creaks ominously, but no one seems concerned. In fact, the stage manager, a man who normally mends boots, nods with satisfaction. Last year it only collapsed twice, he beams. Progress. Actors bustle around with props and costumes, robes stitched from old curtains, fake swords carved from firewood, wings made of chicken feathers glued onto linen straps. Someone holds up a crude mask with a red tongue and curling horns. Devil, he explains, gets chased with a broom. It's tradition. He tries it on and immediately starts cackling in a voice that sends a chicken scuttling for safety. You're swept into the whirlwind before you can protest. A girl grabs your arm and declares you look wise enough to play a shepherd. This is a lie, but you don't argue. She hands you a staff and a piece of wool to drape over your shoulder. You'll stand over there and look amazed when the angel shows up. Try not to fall off the stage. We've lost shepherds that way. The play begins shortly after the bell tolls noon, signalling not just time for prayer, but time for theatrics. The entire village gathers in a semicircle, bundled in cloaks and blankets, shifting from foot to foot in the snow. Children press to the front. The priest watches with a pained expression, already bracing for the more creative interpretations of scripture. And creative they are. The play opens with Adam and Eve, played by two teenage siblings who cannot stop laughing, being evicted from Eden, which is represented by a blanket hung from a stick. The serpent is a long sock puppet operated by the town tanner, who gives it a thick Yorkshire accent. When Eve bites the apple, someone in the audience yells, "Oi, that's for pudding!" and gets a glare from the props master. From there, the action jumps ahead to the Nativity, in the way only medieval theatre can, skipping several centuries with a shrug. You stand in your place, staff in hand, trying to look appropriately awestruck as the angel, a 9-year-old girl in a dress covered in candle wax stains, announces the birth of Christ. She's a bit nervous and forgets most of her lines, but the audience cheers anyway. One of the other shepherds whispers, "She was a star last year, literally. Had to dangle from a tree, sprained her ankle." Then come the wise men, who are clearly just the local farmers in hastily donned robes and golden paper crowns. They bring gifts, a lump of dried herbs, frankincense, a shiny rock, gold apparently, and a dead mouse. "Myrrh," says the farmer, or something like it. No one questions it. Instead, the audience roars with laughter, especially when the donkey, played by a boy crawling under a brown blanket, knocks over the manger and sends baby Jesus, a bundle of straw in a pillowcase, rolling off stage. Then it's time for the devil's big entrance. He leaps out from behind the heaven curtain and lets out a screech so loud it startles the birds from the rafters. His costume includes blackened teeth, soot-smeared cheeks, and an overly enthusiastic pitchfork. He chases a few shepherds off stage, gets hit with a broom, and pretends to die dramatically in a snowbank. The villagers love it. The priest winces again. After the final scene, which involves Mary singing a lullaby while Joseph tries to shoo away a goat that wandered into the performance, everyone claps and stomps their feet. The actors bow, grinning and red-faced. Someone throws a handful of dried peas in celebration. You think it's symbolic, until you get one in the eye. Post-play, the energy is giddy. Everyone mills around the square, praising the performances, trading favourite lines, and reenacting the devil's dramatic tumble into the turnip cart. The angel is carried on someone's shoulders. The sheep, borrowed from an actual pen, are led back to their field, slightly traumatised. Inside the alehouse, mugs are raised in honour of the players. Songs begin again, and the devil, now out of costume and very proud of himself, buys drinks for his angelic counterpart. Someone offers to turn the whole play into a travelling show. The baker says only if he doesn't have to play Joseph again, since the goat peed on his boots. You overhear an older woman muttering that these plays weren't always so cheerful. "Back when I was a girl," she says, "we had the harrowing of hell. Very dramatic. Lots of screaming. Good fun." Her companion nods. "And the martyrdom of St. Catherine, that one had a wheel." They both sip their cider, eyes gleaming with nostalgia. Historians often debate how these mystery plays evolved, whether they were born from church liturgies or simply sprang up in the villages as a way to teach and entertain. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. What's clear, though, is that they weren't just performances. They were living stories, half sermon, half spectacle, threaded through with humour, fear and familiarity. And today, as you peel off your makeshift shepherd's robe and brush straw out of your hair, you feel it too. That odd blend of sacred and silly, of reverence delivered with a wink. This isn't mockery. It's memory, retold in the only way the village knows how, with laughter, chaos, and a goat that refuses to follow stage directions. That night, as you settle near the fire, the air outside thick with snow, and the scent of cider, you find yourself smiling. In a world that often feels cold and brittle, a shared story, especially one this absurd, can warm more than your hands. It wraps around you like a blanket stitched with voices, footsteps, and poorly remembered lines. And as you drift into sleep, you dream of halos made of cheesecloth, angels on ladders, and devils with paper horns slipping on cabbage leaves. By the next morning, the village has settled into a kind of sleepy rhythm, the kind that only comes after several days of feasting, shouting, wassailing, and being chased by the devil in a chicken feather wig. There's frost on the windows again, and smoke rising steadily from chimneys, curling into the grey sky like threads of half-forgotten dreams. Today, the excitement has simmered down to something quieter, more domestic. But don't mistake that for boring. Because while most of the village returns to work, milking, mending, sweeping ash from the hearth, the real action today is in the kitchens and on the chopping blocks, because somewhere, somehow, someone's cooking a goose, or trying to. You catch wind of it early when a woman rushes past you with her apron covered in feathers and a deeply haunted look in her eyes. She mutters something about the devil's own bird and disappears into a cottage. Moments later, a loud honk and the unmistakable sound of furniture being knocked over confirms that yes, today's goose is still alive and very much not on board with the plan. Turns out geese are temperamental creatures, especially when they've survived most of the year by hiding behind the pig shed and biting anyone who comes near. But today, it's their turn to shine, stuffed with herbs, roasted golden, and placed in the centre of the holiday table like a feathery crown jewel. That is, if anyone can catch the thing. You join a group of children running around the common, chasing one such bird, its neck stretched, wings flapping, eyes filled with murderous intent. Eventually, it's cornered between two barrels and subdued with a combination of brute force, bread crusts, and sheer desperation. The boy who catches it is declared goose champion for the day, a title he accepts with pride and a slightly bloody finger. Back in the kitchens, the prep begins. You find yourself helping in one of the cottages, surrounded by clatter and steam. There's a sort of graceful chaos to it, flour on every surface, knives being sharpened, someone frantically grinding spices with a stone mortar while a baby screams in the corner. The goose is plucked with practiced hands, its skin scraped clean, and then stuffed with a mix of sage, onion, and whatever else hasn't frozen solid in the larder. The smell already makes your mouth water. But not everyone is feasting on goose. In fact, most aren't. Geese are expensive, fattened carefully, and often promised to the local lord months in advance as part of one tax or another. For most villagers, today's main course is more likely to be something modest. Maybe a rabbit stew or salted fish rehydrated in ale, in acia, or if you're very lucky, a hen that stopped laying and now qualifies as dinner. But that doesn't mean the meal isn't special. It's all about stretching what you have. A few dried apples added to a meat pie, a splash of the good vinegar, a precious pinch of imported pepper if the merchant passed through recently and didn't charge too steep a price. In the poorest corners of the village, things get even more creative. One woman is making a mock goose, a loaf shaped vaguely like a bird, stuffed with cabbage and barley, and a deep commitment to pretending it's fancier than it is. She paints the top with egg yolk and crows. Tell me that doesn't look like roasted fat. It doesn't, but no one corrects her. You learn that not all food is for eating either. In one home, a girl presses spiced dough into carved wooden moulds. Stars, fish, strange faces with curling beards. They're baked hard and hung with string near the hearth. Keeps the bad spirits too busy licking them to cause trouble, her mother says. You nod slowly, adding that to the growing list of supernatural culinary strategies. Later in the day, you're invited to join a family's meal. The table is simple, a few bowls, wooden spoons, trenchers, but the food is hot and made with care. There's a stew thick with beans and turnips, slices of dark bread toasted over the hearth, and a small dish of preserved plums brought out with exaggerated ceremony. The father grins. Traded a dozen eggs for those. Don't eat them all at once, or your dreams will turn purple. As you eat, stories flow more easily than the thin broth. The family tells tales about Christmases past, one where it snowed so hard the oxen froze where they stood, another when the parish priest accidentally knocked over the altar during midnight mass and blamed the devil. The children laugh, already hyped on the sugar from a rare treat, honeyed oatcakes made special for the season. Crumbly, dense, and alarmingly chewy, they're exactly what you'd expect from a culture that considers surviving the winter a festive achievement. Outside, the scent of roasting meats and boiling cabbage fills the air, mingling into something that smells weirdly nostalgic. You pass a house where someone's roasting chestnuts in a pan over an open flame, and it's honestly the best thing you've smelled in days. Another family is heating up a dish that smells vaguely like feet and onions, but is greeted with cheers when it hits the table. And then there's the cheese. A neighbour proudly presents you with a slice of something round, greyish, and damp. Christmas cheese, he says, aged since last Twelfth Night. You take a bite. It's sour. It's sharp. It fights back. He beams with pride. We call it Bitter Mary, puts hair on your knuckles. You believe him. Your knuckles are already tingling. Despite the variety, or lack thereof, the sense of abundance is real. Not because there's too much, but because there's just enough to share. Enough to celebrate, enough to pretend for one day that the cupboards are bottomless and the fields will always provide. It's a celebration of scraping by and making it look like luxury. Later, as the fire burns low and everyone stretches out by the hearth, bellies full and fingers sticky, someone begins to hum. No one joins in at first, but eventually voices gather, rising together like a slow tide. A Christmas song, rough around the edges, but warm and sincere. It echoes off the low-ceiling beams and settles into your bones. Historians sometimes describe a medieval Christmas meals as opulent feasts for the few, clever scrimping for the many. They are not wrong, but they miss the point a little. Because even if you're eating a hedgehog pie or pretending your boiled turnip is a partridge, the magic is still there. The effort, the ritual, the shared moment where the food becomes more than food. It becomes memory. And tonight, as you curl up on a hay-stuffed mattress, the taste of goose still lingering in your mouth, or possibly just very strong cheese, you feel full in more ways than one. Full of food, yes, but also of story, of tradition, of the strange beauty of people gathering around fire and flavour to keep the cold away. By now, the rhythm of the season has woven itself around you like another layer of wool, itchy, comforting, and impossible to ignore. You've learned how to stay warm without a fireplace in every room, how to chew bread without chipping a tooth, and how to respond when someone says their grandmother saw St. Nicholas wrestling a bear in the woods. The answer, apparently, is just to nod solemnly and offer them some ale. But tonight is different. Because as twilight seeps into the village and the air goes sharp with frost, people begin to gather not for food or folly, but for something quieter, sweeter, and much older than anything written in books, caroling by candlelight. It starts slowly. You notice it first when a group of children wander past your door, each holding a stubby little candle or lantern, bundled so tightly in scarves and furs they resemble waddling turnips. They're humming something just under their breath, the kind of tune that could be a lullaby or a prayer depending on who's listening. You follow them out into the square, where the air crackles with cold and voices. A cluster of villagers is forming under the old oak tree near the chapel. The branches above are laced with snow and hung with a few scraps of ribbon, leftovers from last year most likely. Beneath it, people are lighting their candles from one another's flames, passing light hand to hand. It's not ceremonial exactly. No one announces it, no one directs. It just happens, like snowfall or yawns in a quiet room. The flames flicker against wind-chapped cheeks and fur-lined hoods. You can feel the warmth of the moment even before the first note is sung, and then song. It's not polished, not pretty in the modern sense. No perfect harmonies, no rehearsed arrangements, but it's full, layered with weariness and hope, hunger and warmth. The voices rise together in a carol that starts soft and grows bolder with every line. You don't know the words at first, but you pick them up line by line. Something about bells, something about the light coming back, something that sounds suspiciously like a threat to any spirit that dares interrupt the chorus. Caroling in this village is equal parts worship, warning and wild performance art. After a few rounds under the oak, the group begins to move, slowly, candlelight bobbing along like a trail of will-o'-the-wisps. You follow, stomping your boots through the packed snow. The night is so quiet you can hear the crunch of every step and the soft drip of ice melting from a thatch roof. The carolers move from door to door, singing at each stop. Some houses respond by opening their doors and offering gifts, apple slices, dried nuts, warm beer. Others offer only a nod and a "God keep you," which is still considered generous. One man, slightly drunk and dressed in nothing but a cloak and one boot, demands a second song in exchange for a meat pie. The group obliges, launching into a rowdy number that might technically be about angels, but includes an alarming number of farm animal impressions. At the next cottage, a very old woman steps out and joins the group without saying a word. She doesn't sing, but she hums along, eyes closed, lips smiling. A girl hands her a candle, and she takes it like it's sacred. You learn later that her husband died this time last year, and she hadn't come out of her cottage since midsummer. But the song drew her. You keep moving, the night wrapping itself around you like a thick wool blanket stitched with stars. More carolers join in as you go. The procession grows. Soon there are 30 of you, maybe more, singing in the lanes, warming the air with verses half remembered and occasionally invented on the spot. A man makes up an entire song about St. Bridget throwing snowballs at demons, and honestly it slaps. At one point the group stops near the old mill where the waterwheel groans and creaks under a skin of ice. Here the priest meets the procession, not to scold them, but to bless them. He raises his hand, murmurs something in Latin, and then joins in the next carol with surprising gusto. Turns out he has a deep baritone and knows all 6 verses of In Dulci Jubilo, even the ones that rhyme Bethlehem with clemency through sheer force of will. And then comes the final stop, the poorest cottage in the village. No light in the windows, no smoke from the chimney. A widow lives there with 3 children and a baby, all of them bundled under one moth-eaten blanket and whatever warmth they can squeeze out of an old dog and prayer. The carolers stop outside and raise their candles high. The song they sing now is softer, lower. A lullaby. A promise. No one knocks, no one asks anything, they just sing. And when they finish, someone steps forward and places a loaf of bread and a wrapped piece of smoked meat at the door. Another adds a pouch of dried herbs. Someone else places 3 candles on the sill. Nothing is said. Nothing needs to be. You walk back through the village in silence. Your voice raw from singing, your breath clouding in the starlit air. The candles are still burning in windows now, flickering guardians against the long night. You pass the inn, where someone's still singing badly and enthusiastically. You pass the church, its door now closed, but you swear you hear humming inside. You pass the tree where it all began and see that someone's tied a sprig of rosemary to one of the branches, for remembrance. Historians love to argue about when carolling became part of Christmas, whether it started in the church or in the alehouses, whether the original songs were Latin chants or pagan invocations rewritten with new lyrics. They debate the difference between wassailing songs and carols proper, and whether door-to-door singing was ever about melody at all, or just another form of communal bargaining. But out here, beneath a sky so full of stars you feel like you might float away, it's not about origins, it's about togetherness. It's about carrying warmth on your tongue and light in your hand and offering both freely to the next person in the cold. You return to your cottage, throat sore, heart full, fingers aching in the best way. You set your candle in the window just as the others have done, for luck, for light, for someone wandering past who might need to know they're not alone. By now, the village has settled into that dreamlike rhythm only possible into the middle of a long winter holiday, the kind where days bleed softly into nights, and the hours slip by in a haze of heat, laughter, and slightly burned bread. But just when you think things might be winding down, someone reminds you, grinning, that the feast isn't over. Far from it. This is only the beginning of the 12 days. You've heard the term before, of course. Maybe you even thought it was just a catchy song involving birds and gold rings and the slow descent into madness. But here, in this frost-bitten village, the 12 days of Christmas are a full-blown season, not just post-Christmas hangover, but a structured chaos of feasts, fasts, games, ghosts, and at least one chance for total public embarrassment. The first official day, Christmas Day, is behind you, but that's just the doorway. The next 11 days unfold like a slightly unhinged calendar of minor miracles and excuses for debauchery. And day 2, well, today is about beginnings and endings and absolutely no sense of balance. Welcome to the time of controlled chaos. You wake to shouting outside your window, not panicked shouting, but the competitive kind. Someone's yelling about a missing boot. Someone else is yelling about a pig that's learned how to open latches. You pull on your cloak and step out into the frosty dawn to discover that the Lord of Misrule has declared today a day of disorderly order, which means that nothing will be done properly, and everything will be done loudly. Breakfast is dinner. Boots are worn on hands. The baker is pretending to be the priest and delivering mock sermons from atop a pile of cabbages. The actual priest is sitting in a corner pretending not to notice, holding his head in his hands, whispering prayers to St. Jude, the patron saint of lost causes. You're quickly pulled into the day's reverse roles game, where children act as elders, servants give orders, and even the livestock seem to be in on the joke. One goat is wearing someone's Sunday hat and looks insufferably smug about it. A dog is pushed around in a wheelbarrow by 2 giggling girls who have declared him mayor of the Southfield. After that, it's time for the backward parade. You, along with half the village, are instructed to march backward through the lanes, singing carols in reverse order, and holding spoons in your mouths. Someone throws roasted chestnuts at the crowd for luck, though most of them bounce off people's heads. The logic behind all this? If you start the year with madness, you trick the bad spirits into thinking you're already cursed, and they'll leave you alone. Honest. Somewhere between the 4th and 5th game of Who Can Find the Turnip I Hid in the Well, you ask someone how long this goes on. Till Epiphany, she says, eyes sparkling. That's when it ends, or starts again, depending who you ask. Every day has its own flavour. Some are rowdy, like today, with chill games and absurd challenges. Others are quieter, focused on visiting neighbours, offering blessings or reading omens in leftover bones. There's one day, you're told, where no one speaks until midday, another, where everyone wears their clothes inside out. To confuse the devil, a boy tells you very seriously. He can't follow rules. You end up inside one of the alehouses by late afternoon, where the fire is roaring and someone is trying to juggle eggs badly. A chalkboard has been placed on the wall with the daily decree written in clumsy Latin and worse English. It reads, "No one may walk in straight lines until sundown. Offenders shall be tickled without mercy." So of course everyone starts zigzagging dramatically across the room, knocking into chairs and howling with exaggerated fear. Amidst the silliness, though, you notice something else, an undercurrent. These games, these reversals, they aren't just for fun. They're release valves. All year long, people here follow the rules, obedient to the Lord, the church, the seasons. But now, for just these 12 days, they get to rebel in safe, blessed ways. Chaos with permission, play with purpose. You slip outside for air and find the sky going violet with dusk. The snow reflects the fading light like crushed pearls. The village is quieter now. The children have collapsed into naps. The goat, now without his hat, is asleep by the fire. A few voices drift through the cold, someone humming, someone laughing softly. One old man passes by with a jug in one hand and a piece of chalk in the other. He's marking a symbol on a neighbour's door, 3 initials and a date. You ask what it means. For the 3 kings, he replies. We bless the doors before Epiphany, protection, luck, warmth. He hands you the chalk and nods. Your turn. You write the initials slowly. C, M, B, and the year, split with a cross on either side. It feels oddly solemn after a day of pretending to be a goat's assistant, but that's what this time is, a blend of sacred and silly, of reversals and reminders. Later that evening, another game begins. It's called Find the King's Coin, and it involves hiding a silver penny inside a loaf of bread. Whoever gets the slice with the coin is king for the next day, allowed to make one decree that everyone must follow within reason. Last year's king made everyone hop 3 times before entering a building. The year before that, it was a ban on saying the word cold, which led to some impressively creative synonyms. Tonight the coin ends up in the hands of a girl no older than 10. She clutches it like treasure, eyes wide with the sudden weight of power. After a dramatic pause, she announces her decree. Everyone must sing whenever they're walking, always, even if you're going to the privy. The room erupts into applause, and so the song continues. Historians have long speculated about the 12 days, how they began, how seriously they were taken, and whether people actually followed the correct sequence. Some claim it was strictly religious, others insist it was pure chaos. But standing here, in a room full of tired, happy, slightly drunk villagers trying to walk to the door, while belting out improvised songs about goats, you understand that the truth is somewhere in between. This is how they survive the winter, with structure and nonsense, with candles and chalk, with laughter, noise, and just enough disorder to make the world feel flexible again. As you settle in for the night, you hear someone outside singing about 4 fat doves and a missing boot, and you smile into your blanket. The fire crackles, the snow falls. Tomorrow the madness continues. The morning after the coin decree begins with a muffled chorus echoing across the village, a half-hearted, sleep-slurred attempt at obeying yesterday's royal command. Sing while walking, no exceptions. You hear it before you even open your eyes. Someone trudging past your door is groaning out a melody that might be Greensleeves, or might be the sound of a man regretting his life choices while stepping in frozen pig droppings. You can't help but grin. By now, the 12 days are in full swing. Time feels elastic, days blur. No one is sure what day of the week it is anymore, and honestly no one cares. But even in the flurry of nonsense and role-swapping, there's one day that takes a sudden detour into something more solemn, more purposeful. Today is St. Stephen's Day, also known as Boxing Day, and it's a strange little hinge between revelry and charity, between hangover and redemption. It begins, predictably, with chaos. You follow the sound of shouting to the village square, where a crowd has gathered around what looks like an overturned cart. Someone's turkey got loose. Or maybe it was a goose. Either way, it's now tangled in a bale of straw and being chased by a man wearing only a tunic and a sock. There's some half-hearted applause when it's finally caught, and then everyone remembers what day it is and tries to look a little more dignified. St. Stephen's Day honours the first Christian martyr, which sounds very serious: stoning, persecution, tragic sermons. But here, it's somehow wrapped in a bundle of mischief and generosity. The day's meant for almsgiving. Lords and landowners, and those pretending to be both, hand out food, coins, or leftovers to the poor, or at least they're supposed to. Not everyone is enthusiastic. One particularly stingy reeve is pelted with stale rolls when he announces that he's giving moral advice instead of meat this year. You're swept up in a band of villagers heading from door to door, handing out what they can. Bits of cheese, smoked fish, loaves of day-old bread wrapped in cloth, even tallow candles. A girl gives away her extra mittens. A boy hands over his best apple to an old woman missing most of her teeth. There's no ceremony to it. Just small kindnesses passed hand to hand like heat between palms. At one cottage, you help deliver a parcel to a family who lost their pig to illness in the early frost. They've been scraping by with bean porridge and bread that tastes more like bark than grain. The widow opens the door and accepts the bundle. 2 eggs, a lump of salted butter, and a dried sausage, with quiet gratitude. Her youngest, maybe 3, clutches your leg like you're a walking miracle. You don't say anything. You just ruffle his hair and step back into the snow. Back in the square, someone starts the Boxing Day game, a traditional mock fight that no one really understands but everyone insists is crucial. 2 men square off, armed with padded sticks and oversized gloves made of stuffed burlap. It's not about hurting anyone, it's about putting on a show. They dance, they swing, they miss dramatically. One falls into a pile of ash, the other is declared victor of virtue, and rewarded with a suspiciously grey-looking pie. The children, of course, aren't interested in charity or pageantry. They're staging their own miniature tournament in the alley, between the bakehouse and the well. One declares himself St. Stephen's champion and challenges anyone to single combat with snowballs. You join in, because of course you do, and discover far too late that these kids pack ice like tiny assassins. You're hit squarely in the neck by a missile launched by a girl no taller than your elbow. She curtsies. "Mercy?" she asks sweetly. "Not a chance," you reply, laughing. Later in the afternoon, the parish priest emerges, shaved, washed, and wearing his solemn face. He leads a short service in front of the chapel commemorating St. Stephen and reminding everyone that while revelry has its place, so does remembrance. His words are soft, thoughtful. He speaks of the poor, of those who've gone hungry or alone through the winter, and of how easily a generous hand can change a cold night into something bearable. He doesn't mention the man still picking straw out of his beard after the turkey chase. He probably doesn't need to. You notice, as the service ends, several villagers slipping coins or scraps of cloth into a box near the chapel door. Others hang small tokens, a carved cross, a braid of dried herbs, even a wooden spoon, as offerings. It's not required. No one's watching, but they do it anyway. As the sun begins to dip, the mood shifts again. Warmth returns to the faces. Someone starts playing a pipe near the square, and others gather to dance, slow, deliberate steps that keep the blood moving and the cold from setting too deeply into the bones. The children turn their snowball battleground into a sledding ramp using an old door and a steep bit of hill. Laughter echoes through the village again, but it's softer now, gentler. Dinner that evening is humble. You sit in a cottage with a family you barely know, sharing a stew made of yesterday's scraps and a hard cheese that cracks like stone. But it's good, warm, honest, the kind of meal that asks nothing of you but appreciation. The father toasts with a mug of watered ale and says, "To St. Stephen, who gave everything, and to neighbours who give what they can." You sip quietly. Scholars note that Boxing Day varied wildly from place to place in the medieval world. In wealthier towns, it became an organised charitable affair with baskets distributed by the parish. In poorer areas, it was more personal, small trades, acts of kindness, or just shared meals with those who had less. And in some corners it blurred into something altogether wilder, with fights, feasts, and festivals that had little to do with saints, and everything to do with letting loose. Here, in this muddy, snow-drifted village, it's a bit of everything. Serious and silly, generous and absurd, and you've given a coin to a stranger, been whacked with a padded stick, and eaten soup flavoured with what may or may not have been mutton. All in the name of a martyr few could quote and none would forget. That night, wrapped in wool, half asleep by the fire, you hear one last song drifting through the window, someone singing about the good King Wenceslas and his trek through the snow. You imagine him trudging through drifts to feed a poor man, cloak billowing, breath steaming. It's a romantic image, probably inaccurate, but it's beautiful anyway. By the 13th day of Christmas, yes, the numbering is questionable at this point, you've fully surrendered to the strange flow of time that defines the season. The normal routines of village life have been turned completely on their heads. At this point, no one is sure if it's a Wednesday or 12th Night Eve, or possibly just a very enthusiastic Tuesday. What you do know is this: it snowed again overnight, a clean, heavy fall that has muffled the whole world and turned the fields into a blinding quilt. And for the village youth, that only means one thing: it's time for snowball warfare. You step outside and immediately get nailed in the face. No warning, no shouted taunt. Just a rock-hard ball of packed snow smacking into your forehead with medieval precision. Your attacker? A grinning 10-year-old with a lopsided fur hat and murder in his eyes. Before you can even respond, he's vanished into a pile of hay like some kind of tiny seasonal assassin. You wipe the snow off your face, laugh, and glance around. The entire village square has become a battlefield. Barricades of firewood and overturned carts have been thrown together. Flourishes of evergreen branches decorate one fort's front like some twisted homage to seasonal pride. At least 3 groups have taken sides, and the rules are unclear at best. One team is wearing scarves on their heads like battle banners. Another has painted their faces with soot and is chanting in a way that suggests they take this very, very seriously. A village elder sitting on a stool near the edge of the fray is offering commentary like a retired gladiator coach. "That one there," he mutters, gesturing with a pipe, "took down 3 chimney sweeps last year, brought 'em down with a slush ball to the ear, never saw it coming." You're handed a bundle of snowballs and a wooden pot lid for a shield. You don't remember agreeing to this, but here you are. The team that's claimed you includes 2 blacksmith's apprentices, a shepherd, and a goat who may or may not have been intentionally recruited. Your job, apparently, is to guard the supply line, which consists of a basket of extra snowballs and a dented kettle full of crushed mint leaves. Again, the rules remain murky. The first hour is sheer, delightful madness. Snowballs fly through the air in graceful arcs and cruel ambushes. Someone gets hit and goes down dramatically, clutching their chest and groaning, "Tell my hens I loved them." A team of younger kids attempts to negotiate peace, but is immediately pelted with snow from both sides. The goat switches sides twice. Then comes the legendary counterattack. You're crouched behind a stack of firewood, clutching a half-melted snowball and trying to regain feeling in your fingers when a horn sounds. An actual horn. The opposite team, now clad in cloaks like miniature barbarian raiders, charges with terrifying coordination. They are yelling something in Latin, which is deeply unsettling. One of them hurls a snowball the size of a pumpkin that narrowly misses your ear and knocks the shepherd's hat off. The battle is lost. You surrender by holding up your pot lid like a flag. The goat eats it. As the fighting winds down, there are a few minor injuries. One sprained ankle, a bruised elbow, and a boy with a frozen tongue from trying to taste victory off a metal gate. But no one's angry. This is tradition. This is epected. Every year, the youth declare a brief, glorious war and assert their dominance over the frozen world. The adults mostly stand back and let them, or join in when the mood strikes. Later, the victors parade through the village with branches of holly and torches, singing a half-made-up chant that rhymes valour with turnip seller. They are met with applause, bowls of soup, and the occasional lecture about not aiming for the priest's face next time. That last one is fair. He's still got snow in his ears. You escape the cold inside the alehouse, now packed to the beams with flushed faces and steaming breath. The fire roars, and the room smells of wet wool, pine sap and meat stew that's more bone than broth. Someone passes around mugs of hot cider, and stories from the morning's battle begin to mutate into legend. The 10-year-old who ambushed you is now the White Death, and someone claims he used enchanted snow. You raise your mug to him across the room. He winks, still wearing his lopsided hat like a crown. As night falls, the mood softens. The village, exhausted and glowing with the kind of joy only found in cold cheeks and bruised pride, shifts Muckletut into quieter games. Knucklebones, riddles, a storytelling contest judged by a girl with a lantern and a very serious expression. You listen as one man tells a tale about a snow witch who lives at the edge of the woods and only appears as during these 12 days. She wears a crown of frost, he says, voice low, and if she kisses you, you forget your own name until spring. The room goes still for a moment before someone breaks the silence with a belch and a complaint about freezing toes. The mood lightens again, but the image lingers. Frost, magic, forgotten names. You wonder, not for the first time, how much of this season is built on truths too old to remember clearly. Scholars often debate whether these youth games were sanctioned traditions or tolerated chaos. There are records of snowball fights being banned in certain towns due to property damage, injuries, or general mayhem. But here, in this tiny village wrapped in ice and starlight, it's more than just play. It's a rite, a test, a cold, wet, hilarious proving ground. You leave the alehouse long after dark. The snow has stopped falling and the moon turns the whole world to silver. The battlefield is quiet now, trampled and uneven, with the occasional snowball forgotten in the corners like a relic of war. You walk past the chapel where the door creaks open slightly. Inside, candles flicker, and someone sings softly. No carols now, just a melody to lull the night. At your doorstep, someone has left a small token, a ball of packed snow dusted in ash with a bit of holly tucked inside. You smile. It's a calling card, a challenge for next year. You're already planning your revenge. You sleep deeply that night, aching and warm, heart full of snow and laughter and whatever kind of ancient magic lets a grown adult believe, even for a day, that a pot lid is a shield and a victory chant can echo across the stars. It's the next day, and though your body feels like it's been trampled by an ox in snowshoes, the villagers are already bustling about with a strange giddy energy. Something's in the air. More than just the cold, more than leftover adrenaline from yesterday's snowball siege. You step out into the early light, blinking sleep from your eyes, and immediately catch sight of a cluster of people crowding near the church. There's a banner waving in the wind, stitched with ivy and crowned with mistletoe. Then you see them, 2 people holding hands, beaming like fool, surrounded by a swarm of relatives and livestock. Ah, a Christmas wedding, of course. Winter marriages weren't just tolerated in medieval villages, they were celebrated, especially during the 12 days. Everyone's already here, already festive, already tipsy. Why not throw in some romance before the season ends? And let's be honest, it's too cold to run away from your problems, might as well run toward the altar. You follow the crowd to the church door, where the couple, Thomas and Alice you're told, stand dressed in their best. Thomas is wearing boots that shine suspiciously, probably oiled with goose fat for the occasion, and Alice has tucked a sprig of rosemary behind her ear. Her dress is plain wool, but someone's embroidered a row of tiny stars along the hem. The mistletoe hangs over the entrance tied with red string. Everyone stares at it like it might fall and ruin the whole thing. The priest looks resigned but cheerful, flipping through his notes with the air of a man who knows half the guests are still hungover and the other half are here for the food. The ceremony begins, not in perfect Latin or poetry, but in the hearty, stumbling cadence of village life. Vows are exchanged, hands are bound with ribbon, a dog barks, a child drops a turnip and cries, someone cheers too early, and then, just like that, they're married. The crowd erupts in applause, led by a one-eyed miller who starts clapping before the priest even finishes his blessing. Someone throws a handful of dried lavender, which gets caught in Alice's hair. She laughs, brushing it away, then kisses Thomas full on the mouth right there on the church steps. Scandalous, but frankly everyone's thrilled. The feast kicks off almost immediately, because of course it does. Who waits to celebrate when the beer's already warm and the meat's already spiced? Tables are dragged into the square, and the newlyweds are herded to the head like prized cattle. You end up sitting near a group of musicians tuning mismatched instruments. Pipes, fiddles, a cracked drum that sounds like someone punching a barrel. The food, while modest, is clearly prepared with care. Stew thick with herbs, pies with flaky tops, oatcakes stacked like small wheels. Someone brings out a roasted goose and declares it a symbol of fidelity, then immediately drops it into the snow. A boy retrieves it and is hailed as the Goose Hero, a title he wears proudly for the rest of the day. As the wine flows, thin and sweet, fortified with something that might be honey or might be witchcraft, the games begin. There's a blindfolded race around the church, a guessing game involving pickled eggs, a dancing contest that quickly devolves into a series of increasingly poor decisions involving spinning, stumbling, and one elderly woman attempting a handstand. You're dragged into a game called Leap the Candle, which involves, as the name suggests, leaping over a lit candle without setting yourself on fire. Several people are immediately disqualified. One man clears the flame spectacularly, only to fall directly into a trough of water. He climbs out dripping and grinning, arms raised in victory. The crowd chants his name until someone hands him a meat pie as a trophy. Later, as the dancing slows and the cold deepens, someone starts a traditional marriage song. It's slow and winding, full of strange metaphors, something about geese, bread, and shared blankets. The newlyweds sit wrapped in a single cloak, cheeks red, fingers intertwined. Alice rests her head on the Thomas's shoulder, and he looks like he's just won every battle, coin toss, and harvest festival in history. Someone hands you a cup of warmed ale and says, "Better to marry now, while the gods are sleepy." You raise an eyebrow. "You mean God?" The man shrugs. "God, God, saints, stars. Doesn't matter. They're all busy counting prayers this time of year. Don't pay attention to fools in love." He takes a long sip and grins. That's when it sticks. You learn that mistletoe is not just for kissing. It's protection, a symbol of peace, fertility, and not getting hexed by jealous neighbours. During the ceremony, the couple's hands were rubbed with it, and some of it was burned at the threshold of their new home to keep misfortune away. A girl tells you that if you steal a sprig from a wedding mistletoe and sleep with it under your pillow, you'll dream of your true love. You ask if it works. She scowls. Not yet. There's also talk of wedding omens. If a bird flies overhead during the ceremony, it's a sign of a long, happy marriage. If it poops on the bride, extra fertility. No bird poop today, to the couple's mild disappointment. The fact that the fire didn't go out during the feast is also taken as a good sign. So is the number of guests who fell asleep from joy rather than drink. The fire crackles, the music slows. The newlyweds are led away by candlelight, heading to their shared cottage with a chorus of slightly inappropriate jokes trailing behind them. Alice throws her garland into the air, and it lands on the head of the local carpenter, who immediately starts sweating and mumbling about moving away. You stay in the square a little longer, watching the embers rise into the crisp night air. One of the old women sits beside you, teeth flashing in the firelight. "It's good this time of year," she says, "to love, to start. While the earth's asleep, you get to plant something." She sips from a steaming mug and adds, "Better that than sitting around waiting for the snow to win." Medieval marriage customs were rarely romantic, historians like to say, arranged for alliances, for land, for livestock. And yet, in villages like this one, you see something more. Joy. Hope. Two people making promises in the cold, with neighbours shouting, animals watching, and a fire burning just high enough to keep the dark away. Later in bed, you dream of walking through snow with someone's hand in yours, mistletoe above, and songs following behind you like smoke. Maybe you even catch a glimpse of the snow witch from the night before, lingering at the edge of the trees, smiling softly as if to say, "Yes, this too is part of the magic." The wedding warmth lingers in the village air well into the next morning, a kind of foggy afterglow that sticks to the windows and hearths like wood smoke and sentiment. But now the mood has begun to shift again. There's a nervous sort of energy stirring in the corners of conversations, a ripple of anticipation you can feel even before you understand it. Today the villagers are preparing for something older than marriage, older than mistletoe, older than the church tower itself. Today is the day of the midwinter hunt, a tradition half practical, half supernatural, and fully ridiculous if you think about it too long. It begins with horns, not church bells or shepherd calls, but literal animal horns, blown loud and low from the forest's edge, sending up an eerie cry that makes your skin tingle. One blast, then another, echoing across the fields and bouncing back from the hills. The villagers respond immediately, as if summoned by something older than habit. You follow them toward the meeting point, a clearing just past the last row of cottages, where the snow lies deep and undisturbed. For now, the hunters are already gathering, wrapped in layers of fur and oiled leather, dragging sleds and leading shaggy dogs that bark at every shadow. Some are carrying bows, others heft long spears dull with use. A few look like they haven't actually hunted in years, but just enjoy wearing dramatic cloaks and shouting. The leader, a tall man with a thick beard and a permanent scowl, raises a hand. "Today we find meat," he says, "or we chase ghosts. Either way, we'll be hungry by sundown." No one laughs, but there's a ripple of amusement in the crowd. You're handed a walking stick and a slice of cold bread smeared with lard. Breakfast, apparently, and told to keep up. The hunting party, now numbering around 20, begins to move into the forest. The trees are coated in white, their limbs bending under the weight of snow. The world feels muffled, silenced, as if something is holding its breath. You've never moved through a forest like this before. Every step is a soft crunch, every breath fogs the air. No one speaks much. There's a seriousness to the walk that goes beyond simply finding deer or catching a few unlucky hares. This is as if the hunt is not just for food, but for confirmation that the world hasn't ended during the long night. They say that midwinter is when the wild things walk, when the boundary between the human world and whatever else is out there goes thin as frost on glass. Some say the wild hunt rides through the sky this time of year, a ghostly procession of hunters and hounds led by a shadowy king or a long-forgotten god. Others say you might find more than animals in the woods today, something watching, something testing you. No pressure, still you press on. The dogs lead the way, sniffing eagerly at every snowbank and tree root. Occasionally they bark at nothing, and their handlers whisper calming words in a dialect thick with old superstition. You catch one man tucking a small carved charm into the top of his boot. It's shaped like a horse, but with too many legs. An hour in, the first tracks are found, deer, or possibly wild boar. The leader signals silently, and the group fans out. You're paired with a woman named Elsie, who wears her bow like an extension of her spine. "We won't catch it," she says matter-of-factly, "but we'll follow. That's the point." You tromp through thickets, slide over ice-slick roots, duck under snow-laden branches. Once you think you hear something just ahead. Not footsteps exactly, more like the rustle of something breathing. You turn, but it's gone. Else gives you a half smile. The woods remember who's loud. Midday brings a pause. Fires are built in pits scraped clean of snow, and the party gathers for warmth and cold stew, spooned from wooden bowls. Someone shares a flask of bitter herb wine. Another carves a set of dice from a lump of frozen cheese. Stories are exchanged, the ones that always rise during the hunt. One man swears he once tracked a white stag for 3 days, only to find it vanished at the edge of a standing stone circle. Another claims he shot a hare that stood up, said "thank you," and vanished in a puff of smoke. Else snorts. "You were drunk." The man nods. "Yes, but so was the hare." After the rest, the hunt resumes. You never do catch the deer, or boar, or spectral elk, or whatever it was, but you do find the remnants of something unusual. A clearing where the snow has melted in a perfect circle, a dead tree split clean down the middle, footprints that begin nowhere and vanish after 3 steps. "Fox?" you ask. "Maybe," Elsa replies, "but foxes don't wear shoes." That evening the group returns empty-handed but buzzing with satisfaction. A few rabbits hang from belts, and someone claims to have seen a bear, which would be highly unlikely in this season, but again, no one questions it. The leader declares it a successful hunt in spirit, if not in supper. He raises a toast with a horn of warm mead, and everyone drinks deeply, howling at the sky like a pack of wolves in celebration. Back in the village, a fire is lit in the centre of the square. The hunters are welcomed like champions regardless of their catch. Children gather around them, eager for stories of the forest. One boy holds up a pine cone and declares it a forest gift. His mother claps and calls it a sign of fortune. No one dares disagree. In the alehouse, the night is spent recounting every tree root, misstep, and imagined monster from the hunt. You're pulled into a game of truth or bore where the losers must act out the sound of a dying stag. It's exactly as dignified as it sounds. The goat from the snowball fight gets involved again, though no one remembers inviting him. He wins. As you drift to sleep that night, the sounds of the forest still echo in your ears, the wind through the branches, the crack of ice, the distant bark of a dog chasing something it might never catch. Historians will tell you that midwinter hunts were partly for survival, fresh meat, a change from dried lentils and root stew. But they also hint at ritual, a symbolic confrontation with the wilderness, an offering of presents to a world that might otherwise forget you during the long dark. Today wasn't just about chasing deer, it was about being seen, by the woods, by each other, by whatever else walks beside you when the snow is deep and the sun forgets to rise. The morning after the hunt, you wake up with the distinct feeling that someone, or something, has been watching you. Maybe it's the wind slipping through the shutters, or the strange dream you can't quite shake. A woman made of ice offering you a lantern shaped like a jawbone. Either way, today's air tastes different, sharper, heavier. You step outside and the village feels tense, quiet in a way that suggests everyone's trying not to acknowledge something. It's the season of spirits, not the good kind, not the holy, glowing in a stable kind. We're talking about the other ones, the ones that move along the edges of frost-covered fields and slip into houses through keyholes. Winter in medieval villages wasn't just cold, it was haunted. This was the time when the veil thinned, when the dead were restless, when it was considered downright foolish to be out after sunset without a candle and a charm, and maybe a few clove-stuffed apples in your pocket for protection. You ask around and quickly discover that everyone has their own way of dealing with it. One man swears by drawing chalk circles around his bed. A woman hangs iron scissors near every window pointing downward, to clip the wings of evil. Children wear red strings around their wrists, so the spirits know we're claimed, one girl explains, as if that settles it. The superstitions aren't just folk whimsy. They're woven into the season like mistletoe into garlands. The 12 days of Christmas weren't just a time of feasting, they were a period of cosmic vulnerability. The church might have tried to keep things tidy and sacred, but the villagers, living close to death, close to the land, knew better. Light a candle. Hang rowan over the lintel. Don't whistle at night. And above all, never leave the door unlatched. You find this out the hard way when you forget to bolt the door behind you after heading out to fetch water. By the time you return, your host is pale and wide-eyed. "Did you invite anything in?" she demands. You blink. "No?" She throws salt across the threshold and mutters a prayer in Latin, so badly mangled it might actually be older than Latin. Then she burns a pinch of something sharp and resinous in the hearth. The smell drives away the chill, but also makes your eyes water and your left leg tingle. Apparently you nearly let in the Yule White, a spirit that wanders during the 12 days, looking for forgotten places, unlocked doors, empty chairs by cold hearths. It doesn't do anything especially cinematic, no glowing eyes or dramatic whispers. It just settles, makes things rot, sours the bread, makes your cow stop giving milk, petty stuff. But in a place where survival is already an uphill trudge through mud and illness, that kind of sabotage is deadly. That night, the village is cloaked in precaution. Every hearth burns high, candles sit in each window, bits of bread are left on doorsteps. For the wandering dead, someone tells you, they get hungry too. A child warns you not to look into any mirrors after dark. You won't see yourself, just someone who looks like you, waiting to take your place. And here's the thing. No one seems frightened by this, cautious, sure, wary. But fear doesn't rule the night. They've lived with these stories their whole lives. The spirits are part of the season, just like carols and feasting. They're not necessarily evil, just touchy, easily offended. Best not to provoke them. You get the sense they're treated like honoured but unpredictable relatives who might burn your house down if you forget their birthday. You join a family for dinner, turnip stew again, blessedly thickened with yesterday's goose bones, and they talk casually about strange things seen in the woods. A hunched figure with a lantern, a face reflected in the water trough where no face should be, a pair of footprints leading to a door but never away. A grandmother tells you that if you walk backward around the church 3 times on New Year's Eve, you'll see your death. Or your true love, she says. Depends who you've offended. Then she winks and drops a clove into your drink. Later, the children gather around the fire to tell ghost stories. Not for scares exactly, though you definitely shiver, but as a kind of tradition, a way of acknowledging the darkness without letting it rule them. The stories are strange, haunting, often unfinished. One is about a man who wakes up with snow in his lungs. Another features a creature that lives under floorboards and imitates the voices of loved ones. It's not lying, a girl says seriously. It just wants to be let in. Someone starts to tell a story about the midwinter bride, a pale woman who visits men who sleep alone during the 12 days and asks them if they remember her. If they say yes, she disappears. If they say no, they wake up frozen. A boy interrupts. That only happened once. The storyteller nods solemnly. Once is enough. You notice the room is dimmer than usual tonight. Most of the candles are burning low, and no one rushes to replace them. It's like they're waiting, watching, letting the dark come closer just to prove they're not afraid. But just before bed, every single one is relit. Fresh wicks, strong flames, all placed exactly where they need to be. You crawl into your straw mattress, heavy with blankets and heavier with thoughts. Outside, the snow has stopped falling. The wind has died down. The silence is immense, thick enough to hear your heartbeat. You close your eyes, then open them again. Just to check, the hearth's flame is still glowing. The scissors are still hanging. The bread is still on the doorstep, just in case. Historians sometimes scoff at these beliefs, chalk them up to ignorance, poor education, fear of the unknown. But those scholars didn't live where wolves howled, the edge of frozen forests, and the dark could last for 16 hours. These weren't just fairy tales. They were precautions, survival strategies disguised as superstition, and perhaps a little wisdom too. After all, who's to say what walks the lanes when everyone else is asleep? You drift off to the faint crackle of the fire, one eye half open, the smell of clove and smoke in the air, and the distant, almost inaudible sound of something moving in the snow. When you open your eyes the next morning, everything feels frozen in place. Not just outside, where the snow lies untouched in thick, pristine drifts, but inside too. The air in the cottage has the kind of stillness usually reserved for churches or graveyards. Your breath hangs visibly in front of you, coiling like smoke in the weak morning light slipping through the window slats. But then comes the scent, wood smoke and meat fat, and the quiet hum of voices and spoons scraping bowls. It's another winter morning, cold as ever, but in its own way, beautifully warm. Someone places a bowl in your hands before you even sit up. Porridge, with a slick of butter and a precious dusting of cinnamon, a luxury considering the price of spices. It's from a wedding gift, your host says with a little smile. Might as well use it while we're still merry. You nod, grateful, and sit on the low stool near the hearth, watching the flames flicker inside the belly of the stone oven. The hearth is more than a place to cook. It's the heart of the home. It warms the bodies, certainly, but it also warms the soul. This little fire, these smouldering logs and glowing coals, they carry the laughter of every meal, the tears from stories told in the dark, the rhythm of spoons stirring broth, the lullabies hummed over sleeping children. All the while the wind may batter the thatch, the snow may swallow the fields, but the hearth stays lit. You watch as the family goes about their day, bundled in layers and wrapped in routine. The mother kneads dough near the fire, hands red and raw from the cold but moving with practiced grace. The father sharpens a knife slowly, his breath clouding with each exhale. Their daughter braids strips of cloth together for kindling. The littlest child sits closest to the flames, holding a wooden spoon like a scepter and muttering a song that has no beginning or end. Outside, the world might be bleak. The stores of food might be low. The threats of illness, wolves, or the occasional wandering spirit might still loom. But in here, the little rituals of domestic life keep the fear at bay. It's hard not to be charmed by it, even as your fingers begin to thaw. In this space, the battle isn't against the monsters or curses, it's against the quiet erosion of hope. Later, you're sent out with the daughter to collect kindling from the brush near the edge of the woods. The snow crunches under your boots and the air smells sharp and clean like pine needles and old stone. As you walk, she tells you about fire superstitions, rules her grandmother insisted on. Never let the hearth go dark during the 12 days. Always bank the coals properly at night. Don't burn elderwood. Why, you ask? She shrugs. 'Cause it screams. You both laugh, but neither of you test the theory. When you return, the cottage is warmer, bustling now with preparation for the evening meal. Tonight's special, a rabbit stew, courtesy of a trapline that finally produced something edible. The meat is thin, so barely enough for the 5 people who live here, let alone guests. Still, you're given a fair share. No one's pretending this is a feast. It's not a celebration, it's just a good day, and that's enough. After dinner, the children beg for stories, not the scary ones tonight. Yesterday's shadows still hang in the air, but ones of comfort. Their mother tells them about St. Bridget, how she wove her cross from rushes on a cold night just like this, and how her fire never went out. The kids listen, eyes wide, half asleep but too enchanted to drift off. You watch the flame in the hearth crackle and dance, casting orange light over their faces. And then the father tells a tale, not of saints, but of old beliefs. The fire spirit that lives in the hearth. He says that if you anger it, your bread won't rise, and your stews will always taste of ash. You must treat it kindly, feed it well, speak gently near it, and never curse in its light. It listens, he says, not joking. It remembers. His wife nods in agreement. She gives the fire a little pinch of salt, as if to say, so no offence meant. The grandmother, who barely speaks all day, pipes up from her stool. The fire shows you your truth, she says softly. Not what you say, what you are. The children go quiet. One mutters, I hope mine likes me. Everyone chuckles. You sit there as the flames dance lower, the light softening, the warmth clinging to your legs and chest. It's not just heat, it's history. That hearth has seen births and deaths, joy and sorrow, jokes told for the 100th time, and tears spilled quietly into bowls of broth. It is the witness to every human moment that happens when no one is looking. The flickering light plays across the walls, casting shapes that move and twist. A face appears in the smoke for just a moment. Could have been a trick of the eye, or the warmth making your thoughts loose. You glance around. No one else reacts. But then again, maybe they've all seen something like it before. Maybe that's why they treat the fire with such respect. Not fear exactly, just an understanding, an agreement. I'll keep you warm if you keep me fed. Outside, snow continues to fall, quiet as breath. You hear a gust of wind shake the walls and something rustle in the chimney, but the fire doesn't flicker. It burns steady and true, orange and alive, holding the dark just outside the threshold. Historians tend to focus on the church calendar, the festivals, the court traditions when discussing medieval winters. They overlook these smaller rituals, the shape of a wooden spoon, the rhythm of kindling snapped over a knee, the weight of a child falling asleep near the coals. But this is where people lived, really lived. Not in the cathedrals or the halls, but in cottages like this one, with frozen toes and warm hands, telling stories in the flicker of a flame. You fall asleep near the hearth, back against the wall, heart slow, breath warm. You dream of a fire that speaks in crackles and sparks, whispering secrets in a language only the bones understand. When you wake, the coals are low but glowing, and the room is filled with the soft silence of people still alive, still dreaming, still warm. You wake before the others the next morning, stirred by the slow rhythm of a bell tolling in the distance, a low, patient sound that rolls across the snowy rooftops and settles into the spaces between breaths. Outside, the world is washed in pale blue light. The snow has stopped, and the frost glitters like glass, spun across every branch and rooftop. Today is one of the holiest days of the season, and everyone in the village knows it by heart. Tonight is midnight mass. You step outside, breath clouding in the still air. The whole village seems suspended in a breath caught between the bustle of the season and the reverence of the day. The usual laughter and morning banter are absent. People speak quietly, tread softly. Even the dogs seem subdued, curling against the cottages instead of barking at shadows. Back in the cottage, the family begins their morning with prayer. Not dramatic, no rolling Latin or waving hands, just a soft murmur of thanks and a request for warmth, health, and enough food to get through the last of winter. The children kneel with their eyes mostly open, stealing glances at the bread on the hearth. Their mother shoos them away gently and reminds them that no one eats meat today until after Mass. It's a day for fasting and thinking, she says, not stuffing your cheeks like a squirrel with secrets. Still, preparations hum along. The morning is spent gathering clean linens for the altar and polishing the few treasures the little church owns. A brass censer, a chipped chalice, a scrap of blue cloth embroidered with gold thread, worn thin from decades of use but beautiful nonetheless. You volunteer to help carry things to the chapel and end up part of a quiet procession of villagers hauling candles, flowers made from wax paper, and bundles of herbs to hang along the windows. The church is small and cold with stone walls that exhale centuries of damp. But inside something stirs. You feel it the moment you step across the threshold. It's not just religion, it's reverence, yes, but more than that. It's the way everyone moves carefully, speaks softly, behaves as though the stones themselves are listening. You look up at the high wooden beams of the ceiling, where cobwebs glint like tinsel, and wonder how many prayers have drifted up there and gotten caught. As the day stretches on, the mood grows more contemplative. No games today, no singing in the lanes or chasing goats dressed as kings. The revelry is paused, only for a while. Meals are simple and quiet, mostly stewed grains and flatbread. Some families share stories of past Christmases, of years when the snow came so heavy it crushed the granary, or when the fire wouldn't light and they took turns breathing on the embers. You learn that many people choose this day to reflect on those who've passed, especially those who didn't make it to see another winter. In one house, a woman lights 4 candles, one for her mother, one for her sister, one for the baby she lost, and one for someone she never names. She invites you to sit with her. You don't need to say anything, she tells you. They hear us better when we're quiet. As dusk falls, the village begins to shift again. Slowly, silently, people emerge from their cottages, wrapped in their best cloaks and shawls, many of which are clearly family heirlooms. The children wear flower crowns and little belts with tiny bells that jingle softly as they walk. The men carry lanterns, their flames flickering like fireflies in the dark. It's time. The bell tolls again, slow, pulling everyone toward the chapel. You join the crowd, walking through the snow-laced lanes, your breath rising in rhythm with theirs. The world is impossibly still. No wind, no howling dogs, just boots crunching and the soft murmur of prayers whispered under cloaks. Inside the chapel it's warmer than expected. The villagers have packed in tight, shoulder to shoulder, all breathing the same candlelit air. Dozens of tapers flicker in iron sconces and on the altar, casting the whole place in a gold so soft it feels like honey. The scent is a heady blend of pine, frankincense, tallow smoke, and something faintly herbal, lavender maybe, or yarrow. The herbs hung along the walls crackle gently in the warmth. The priest, now in his finest robes, still patched, still humble, but regal in their own way, steps forward. He begins with a Latin hymn, and the voices of the villagers join in slowly, tentatively, until the whole chapel fills with music. Not harmony exactly, but unity. Everyone singing, even if only barely, holding the tune like a shared thread woven through each heart. The Mass itself is long. There are readings, prayers, and silences so deep you can hear the wood in the ceiling creak. A baby fusses in the back and is gently soothed. An old woman leans on her grandson's shoulder and hums a lullaby under her breath during the Eucharist. Then at last the priest raises the chalice, and the congregation goes still, holding their breath. The light flares slightly, or maybe it just seems to. The moment feels stretched, suspended, like something very old and very kind has entered the room. You don't have to believe in anything specific to feel it. Afterward, no one rushes out. People linger, some cry, some hug, others just stand in the candlelight as if afraid to let go of the warmth. Outside, the snow begins to fall again. Soft, slow, steady. You walk back with the family, their children sleepily leaning against each other. The youngest says, "The angels were singing in the roof." No one corrects him. Back in the cottage, you all sit for one final meal before sleep. It's modest, roasted roots, warm bread, a piece of cheese and a cup of spiced wine. But it feels sacred. You eat slowly, no one says much. The fire burns low and gentle. Historians often emphasize the social and religious structure of midnight mass, the rituals, the liturgical drama, the power of the church. But they rarely speak of the feeling, the quiet communion of people gathered not just to worship, but to remember that they're not alone. In the darkest part of the year, with the wind outside and the long night still ahead, they light candles, raise their voices, and say in whatever language they have, "We are still here." You fall asleep with that thought cradling your heart, the candle still flickering in the window, and the sound of the last hymn humming gently in your dreams. By the time the sun drags itself over the horizon the next morning, if you can even call that faint glow in the clouds sun, something peculiar has already begun stirring in the village. It's not the usual shuffle of feet to the well or the quiet clink of spoons in porridge bowls. It's laughter. Laughter and singing, but not the solemn church-laced kind from last night. This is rowdy, absurd, and occasionally off-key. You crack open the door to find a small procession weaving down the main lane, a line of children, wide-eyed and giggling, following a boy no older than 10, wearing a crooked bishop's mitre on his head and a robe 2 sizes too large. "Make way for the boy, Bishop," someone shouts, as if that's not the strangest sentence you've heard all week. A group of elders watches from their stoops, trying to suppress smiles behind their mugs. You realise, it's that day. The boy bishop tradition is one of those wonderfully baffling medieval customs that doesn't make immediate sense unless you live in a world where goats wear ribbons and misrule is a valid leadership strategy. Rooted in a centuries-old blend of church and carnival, it's the practice of appointing a young boy, usually from the local choir or school, to act as bishop for the day. Not just dress like one, but lead prayers, give blessings, and, depending on how brave the priest is feeling, even deliver a mock sermon. The real bishop, or in this case the village priest, plays along with remarkable grace, stepping aside for the day and trailing the procession with a bemused expression, hands folded, as if silently praying the boy doesn't declare cows sacred or outlaw cabbage. The boy bishop, whose name is Thomas, turns to the gathered villagers and raises his arms. "Let all be jolly," he intones, voice cracking only slightly, "and let all give the bishop cake." Everyone cheers. From there the mock ecclesiastical chaos begins. Thomas is carried, yes, carried, on the shoulders of 2 older boys, both barely managing not to drop him as they trudge through snowbanks and slush. The bishop's crozier is a broomstick painted gold, and he uses it to tap doorposts, bless chickens, and once, accidentally or not, you're not sure, poke a thatcher in the face. You follow the procession toward the church, where the altar has been slightly rearranged. Pine garlands hang where the banners used to be. A small stool has been placed behind the pulpit so the boy bishop can see over it. When the villagers settle in, squishing together on wooden benches and stools, the priest announces, "By ancient tradition and mild madness, the sermon is not mine today. May the bishop speak wisely." Thomas clears his throat, straightens his oversized collar, and opens a leather-bound book. Upside down, he begins us with an enthusiastic but mostly improvised sermon that includes such theological gems as God loves goats, even the stubborn ones, heaven is probably warm with puddings, and let us be kind, especially to people who drop pies. You look around, no one's laughing at him, or they're laughing with him, especially the older folk who seem delighted by the whole affair. The priest sits in the corner, sipping something that may or may not be wine, and muttering prayers in Latin that sound suspiciously like stifled chuckles. After the sermon comes the mock mass, which is part ritual, part comedy sketch, and entirely village-driven. The choir sings a carol, with lyrics rewritten to include local jokes. Someone reads a holy decree that involves 3 pigs being given honorary sainthood for services to leftovers. The boy bishop blesses the congregation with a sprig of holly, waving it like a royal sceptre. But in the midst of all this silliness, there's something strangely touching about it. This isn't mockery, it's affection. The village takes joy in handing the world to a child for a day, not to humiliate him, but to celebrate him. To say in a way, we trust you to lead, even if your crozier is made of broomstick and your blessing made the rooster faint. Outside the church, the celebration continues. Bread is handed out along with slices of dried apple and a cake baked especially for the bishop, dense with spice and almonds. Thomas cuts the first piece, then insists it be given to the oldest woman in the village, for she hath seen many winters. He gets a wet kiss on the cheek for that, which makes him blush so red he nearly drops the cake. There's music again, pipes, fiddles, and a boy tapping rhythm on a pot lid. Dancing breaks out in the square, despite the cold. A group of teenagers organise a mock confession booth, where people line up to admit things like, "I stole a pie crust in September," or "I cursed my neighbour's cow, but only lightly." The boy bishop is eventually led through the village in a final procession, blessing homes with loud declarations like, "May your roof not fall down," and "May your boots always find dry straw." The villagers cheer. Someone throws a small handful of flour like confetti. One door is blessed with a kiss from the bishop himself, who promptly slips on the threshold and is caught mid-fall by 2 very startled chickens. As the sun begins to lower, the robes are returned to the church, the hat is hung by the hearth to dry, and Thomas is once again just a boy, muddy-kneed, cake-stained, and grinning like he's just ridden a comet. You find him later sitting beside the fire, his mitre now perched on a stool beside him. "Did I do it right?" he asks. You nod. "Better than most bishops I've seen?" He nods solemnly and picks up a crust of bread, which he dunks into a mug of watered wine, like he's still in full character. Historians often treat the boy bishop custom as an oddity, evidence of medieval whimsy or a tool of social commentary. And yes, it may have served to satirise authority or remind grown-ups not to take themselves too seriously. But more than that, it gave the powerless a day to speak. A child's voice rising in the nave, a sermon that replaced judgment with joy, a reminder perhaps that sometimes the holiest words are the ones delivered with crumbs on your chin and your heart wide open. That night, you fall asleep with the sounds of laughter still ringing in your ears, and dream of sermons that start with pudding, goats turned into saints, and children leading candle-lit processions through snow-draped streets while the stars blink down in full approval. The 12 days are nearing their end now, though the village seems determined to squeeze every last drop of chaos and charm from them before the solemnity of Epiphany arrives to pull everyone back into order. But today there's a different tone buzzing just beneath the surface, a jittery kind of energy, not quite festive, not quite panicked. The villagers are counting things, fingers, coins, chickens, wrongs. Welcome to medieval New Year's Day, where the toasts come with side glances and the blessings are whispered in case they jinx it. You step out into the crisp morning air, your boots crunching through a thin crust of ice atop yesterday's snow. It's colder than it has any business being. The wind bites like a creditor, which feels fitting given the mood, because while some places in the world will eventually mark New Year's on the spring equinox or March 25th, or some church feast in April, here, in this small stubborn village, January 1st is the reckoning. People nod as you pass, but few stop to chat. They're too busy tending to private rituals, tossing the ashes from their hearths out to the east, sweeping thresholds toward the door instead of away from it, refusing to lend anything, not a spoon, not a pinch of salt, not even a compliment. What you give today, a woman explains solemnly, you'll give all year. You pause to tie your boot, and she adds under her breath. Also, don't say anyone's name 3 times, even if they're standing right there. Despite the rituals, or maybe because of them, the tension is palpable. Today is not just about beginnings, it's about cleaning up after the mess you made last year. Literally. Inside every cottage, things are being scrubbed, shaken out and rearranged. Beds are restuffed with fresh straw. Floors are sprinkled with herbs and swept. One boy is tasked with digging the privy a few feet deeper, to bury the old year properly, his father says, before adding, and because it smells like Satan's pantry. You join a family as they perform one of the more hopeful customs, the first footing. The first person to cross the threshold after midnight, or in some households after sunrise, is meant to determine the household's luck for the year. Tall, dark-haired men are considered ideal. Redheads and women, less so. You, blessed with neutral colouring and adequate height, are pushed through 3 separate doorways before breakfast. Every time, you're handed a small token, a coin, a crumb of bread, a pinch of salt to carry into the year's necessities. You also get a pat on the back and a whispered, "Please don't curse the goats." After that, you're pulled into another ritual. Settling scores. Not with fists, unfortunately, but with words, coins and awkward apologies. Villagers are making rounds to those they've borrowed from, argued with, or accidentally hexed over the past year. A man hands over a half-knitted mitten and says, "Meant to return this last Lent. Here." His neighbour accepts it like it's a peace treaty. 2 sisters exchange stiff nods and mutter, "I forgive you," before retreating like diplomats after a tense negotiation. The tavern is particularly crowded today, not with drinkers, though there's always a few, but with the accountants, or the medieval version of them. People with rolled-up scraps of parchment, tally sticks, and extremely tense expressions. Debts accounted, interest grumbled over, favours exchanged like currency. One woman returns a borrowed hen by carrying in a newly hatched chick and saying, "I owe you the rest by Easter." You find yourself in a corner seat sipping hot cider and watching a man attempt to reconcile 2 years' worth of bread loans by stacking oatcakes into towers. No one seems sure if he's succeeding, but he's doing it with enough authority that no one challenges him. By midday, the mood has lightened slightly, with the worst of the debt settling behind them and the required apologies offered. However begrudgingly, people begin looking ahead. You help hang sprigs of rosemary and bay leaves over thresholds to ward off illness and ill will. A child presses a coin into your palm and says, "Don't spend it, just hold it. That way you're never empty." You thank her and keep it, slipping it into the hem of your cloak. Afternoon brings one of the stranger customs, predictive baking. A woman invites you into her home, where she's making a New Year's loaf shaped like a sunburst. It's not for eating, she warns, slapping the dough like it insulted her. It's for watching. Once it bakes, she slices it open, examines the holes in the crust, and declares whether the year will bring health, rain, or 3 weddings. A man brings in a loaf shaped like a goose and claims it's forecasting his fortune in gambling. Or poultry, someone mutters. Toward evening, the tone shifts again. People begin gathering at the church for a short blessing. This isn't a full mass, but a kind of reset, a benediction for the coming year. The priest raises a small bundle of dried herbs, sprinkles everyone with water, and mutters a prayer for peace, prosperity, and fewer goats in the bell tower. Afterward, the villagers return home for modest suppers. Simple stews, flatbreads, and a shared cup of mead if they're lucky. Some still fast, believing that beginning the year with restraint will bring abundance later. Others do the opposite, stuffing themselves with whatever food remains from the 12 days to make room for fresh luck. Better to start the year with full bellies and empty shelves, a woman says. Then the saints know what to refill. As the fire burns low and the stars return, you find yourself sitting with the family that first welcomed you. Their children fall asleep mid-sentence. The father counts the logs by the hearth and sighs. "It'll be tight, but we'll make it," he says, mostly to himself. His wife leans into his side and says, "We always do." Historians often reduce medieval New Year's to notes on calendars, when it officially started depending on region or religious tradition. But for the people in these cottages, none of that matters. The New Year isn't about dates, it's about herbal resolve. Clearing the slate, feeding the fire, making peace with your neighbour, your animals, your debts, your gods, and maybe yourself. You fall asleep with your lucky coin clutched in your hand, the faint scent of rosemary in the air, and the sense that despite everything, you're heading into the next stretch of winter with your head high and your hearth warm. The new year may be officially underway, but if you thought that meant a return to order and calm, you clearly haven't been paying attention. Just as the villagers begin to catch their breath, just as the last of the debts are tallied and the wine cask scraped clean, something altogether different begins to ripple through the snow-draped streets, a kind of ancient mischief pulled straight from the bottom of the seasonal box. You step outside and immediately find yourself face to face with a creature wearing a horse's skull. You don't scream, not exactly, but your entire soul flinches backward, your feet stumbling through a snowbank as a chorus of bells jingles behind the thing. It's followed by a half-dozen villagers dressed in tattered cloaks and veils, their faces painted black, white, red, and green. One wears a tree branch crown, another has feathers stuck in their hat at truly irresponsible angles. Mummers, someone whispers beside you. There were mummers. Ah, that explains nothing, but soon enough you're swept into the heart of one of the most delightfully unhinged traditions of the season. Mumming. Think travelling theatre troupe meets fever dream. The performers, known as mummers, go door to door throughout the village, dressed in masks, rags, and occasionally animal bones, performing short, chaotic plays and demanding food, drink, or coin in exchange for their questionable talent. It's a ritual, a spectacle, a bargain, and it begins whether you're ready or not. The group stops in front of a house, bangs loudly on the door, and bursts into an impromptu performance the moment it opens. The play is an amalgamation of various old stories: St. George fighting a dragon, Death being challenged to a duel, a fool who outwits both of them by falling asleep in a bucket of cider. Lines are shouted rather than recited. Costumes are mostly blankets and face paint. The dragon is clearly a broom with teeth drawn on it. Still, it's glorious. Children squeal with delight. Adults cheer and heckle in equal measure. The homeowner, grinning, blushing, still in slippers, hands the mummers a wedge of cheese and a pot of ale in thanks. One of them bows dramatically, almost falls over, and then they're off to the next house, dragging the skull-headed figure, who you learn is called the Marie-Louide, behind them. The Marie-Louide, ancient and unsettling, is part of a tradition that likely predates Christianity, with roots buried deep in winter solstice rites. It's meant to represent something. Death, rebirth, good luck, a hungry spirit. All of the above. No one agrees. And that's the thing about mumming. It's part play, part pagan remnant, part social chaos. The rules are bendy. Identities are hidden. Men play women. Women play devils. The fool mocks the Lord. The dead come back to life, again and again, because that bit always gets laughs. It's satire. It's tradition. It's a release valve for a community that's spent the last few months buried under snow, debt, superstition, and turnip stew. You join the procession as it weaves through the village, stopping at cottage after cottage, each time performing some slight variation of the story. In one, death wins. In another, the fool turns into a pig. In a third, a doctor, played by someone who is absolutely the town brewer, brings everyone back to life using miracle cider, which the audience is encouraged to taste. No one declines. But it's not just silliness. There's an edge to it too. Mumming is a chance to speak truth under the guise of play. One character mockingly blesses the landlord's sheep and says, "May they stop growing legs so they stay in one place." Another sings a song about the price of bread, inserting names you recognise from debt settling day. The crowd laughs, but a few faces go stiff. For one night, the powerless can poke the powerful as long as they're wearing a mask and dancing. As the sky begins to dim, the mummers arrive at the manor house. The big one, the one that always smells like cured ham and expectations. This is the real prize. They knock with exaggerated pomp. When the door opens, they bow low and begin a slightly more polished version of the play. Still absurd, still loud, but with a little extra reverence tucked under the jokes. The Lord watches from the doorway, arms crossed, amused but wary. When the fool delivers a speech about hogs eating better than tenants, there's a flicker of tension. But then the Mari Lwyd dances in a circle and accidentally knocks over a potted rosemary bush, and the moment breaks. The Lord laughs, and the whole group exhales. They're given a basket of meat pies, a jug of mead, and something wrapped in cloth that may or may not be a leftover Christmas pudding from last year. They bow again and the crowd cheers. The mummers turn and march back down the lane, singing loudly and off-key, "Here we come a-wassailing, with no clue where we go. We sing for meat and mischief and hope it doesn't snow." Back in the square, a fire is lit. The Mari Lwyd is set in the centre, Skull grinning in the firelight, and the group begins a final dance, a lurching, circling, foot-stomping thing that looks somewhere between ritual and accident. People join in. Laughter rings out. A jug of something strong is passed hand to hand. The fool makes a speech in mock Latin that ends with "Amen" and "pass the cheese." Later, someone explains the old belief: if the mummers visit your home, luck will follow you. But only if you give them something: food, drink, a coin, a joke, a moment of kindness. If you turn them away, well, let's just say that bread may not rise for a while. Your pig might run off. Your dreams might smell faintly of sulphur. Historians squabble over where mumming originated. Pagan festivals, Roman Saturnalia, Celtic rites. It doesn't matter to the villagers. What matters is this: one night a year you can be anyone. You can say anything. The world flips, and for a brief, joyous moment, the masks tell the truth more clearly than any bare face ever could. That night, you fall asleep with the echo of pipes and laughter still humming through the walls, and in your dreams, the Mari Lwyd leans close, not threatening, not frightening, just curious. She whispers something in a voice like snow crunching underfoot. You don't remember the words when you wake up, but the warmth they left behind lingers in your bones. The light comes late on Epiphany morning, as though the sun itself is reluctant to rouse from bed. You can't blame it. The fire's still warm, your feet are tucked deep into woolen socks someone knit from scratchy brown yarn, and the air smells like sweet bread and candle wax. But today is special. Today is Epiphany, the day when the 12 days officially come to a close. Not with a sigh, but with a crown, a star, and a game of glorious, glorious pretend. You step outside to find the village already awake and bustling, albeit in a way that's more reverent than rowdy. Bells chime from the chapel, and people carry baskets of dried fruit, pastries, and little bundles of frankincense wrapped in scraps of cloth. Somewhere in the background, children's voices sing a lopsided version of "We Three Kings," replacing most of the words with things like "We bring beans" and "Frankfurter's farm." Close enough. Inside the chapel, 3 boys have been dressed up as the Magi, or as they're sometimes called here, the 3 kings of pretending very hard. Each one wears a paper crown covered in bits of foil and winterberries. One has a painted beard, the second carries a box that might have once held nails, and the third has clearly stolen a scarf from his older sister to use as a robe. Regal, if not entirely accurate. The village priest leads them down the aisle, singing a hymn that floats up into the rafters like smoke. The boys try very hard to look solemn, though the one with the box keeps peeking inside like he's afraid the gold might have turned into goat pellets. You sit near the back, caught up in the quiet magic of it. The candles, the music, the earnestness. But this is not a grand affair. It's small, homegrown, and entirely personal. These people don't need gold-threaded vestments or a cathedral choir to feel something sacred. They just need candlelight and tradition, and maybe a pastry or two. After the brief service, the congregation steps out into the cold again. The priest, who by now must be surviving entirely on cider and divine patience, blesses a stick of chalk held by one of the children. Then, with a little nod, he invites the villagers to begin marking their doors. One by one, families write in white chalk above their thresholds. 20 plus C plus M plus B plus 26. It's a mixture of the current year and the initials of the Magi, Caspar, Melchior and Balthazar, though some will say the letters stand for Christus Mansionem Benedicat instead. May Christ bless this house. Either way, it's the same intent. A prayer, a shield, a line drawn in faith and chalk against whatever the long year might bring. You're handed the chalk too. A quiet little girl presses it into your palm and says, "Make it neat, the ghosts can read." You try your best. Back in the village square, the final Epiphany rituals begin. There's cake. Of course, king cake or 12th night bread, a round golden loaf stuffed with nuts, dried fruit, and most importantly one hidden bean. Whoever finds the bean in their slice becomes the king or queen of the day. They wear a crown of holly and issue royal decrees obey no chores until sundown, or everyone must speak in rhyme. You're handed a slice, warm and fragrant, and chew carefully. Around you, the villagers eat with exaggerated caution, eyes narrowing with each bite. Then a triumphant shout. A boy holds up the bean victorious and is promptly crowned with a woven band of ivy and pine. His first decree: the goat may enter the alehouse. Cheers erupt. The goat, somehow already wearing a hat, trots inside like this was his plan all along. The rest of the day is filled with the games, songs and gift-giving. Not the kind with fancy wrapping paper and ribbon, but small tokens, a carved spoon, a ribbon, a string of dried apples. It's believed that the Magi brought gifts, so it's only right to give something small today. A woman hands you a button shaped like a star. It was my brother's, she says. He always said it kept him from losing his way. You promise to keep it close. There's also the blessing of the animals this afternoon. Because why not go all in on symbolism? Chickens are paraded past the chapel, cows get a sprig of rosemary behind the ears, and the village cat receives a solemn pat and a sardine. Someone tries to bless a hedgehog, but it escapes into a snowbank and becomes an omen instead. You sit near the fire later, sipping something that tastes like cinnamon and regrets, and talk with a few of the elders about what Epiphany used to mean, what it still does. One man says, "It's the day you finally let go of the old year." A woman counters, "No, it's the day you step into the new one, but sideways so it can't see you coming." Scholars debate the exact origin of many Epiphany customs. Some say the king cake came from Saturnalia feasts, some trace the chalking to medieval German monks. But here in this village, none of that matters. It's not about accuracy, it's about continuity. A thread running through the centuries, passed from hand to hand in song, in cake, in chalked up. Dust and goat tracks. As evening falls, the stars come out, clear and sharp above the rooftops. The village gathers in silence one last time in the square, lanterns in hand to sing a final carol, one of those bittersweet ones, not triumphant, not mournful, but something in between. A song about stars and roads and travelling far to find what was close all along. You look around and realise that the 12 days weren't just a holiday. They were a rhythm, a rising and falling of joy, chaos, quiet and meaning stitched into the life of the village so deeply that even the chickens seem to understand when to cluck in time. As the final note fades into the cold air, a small child leans against you and whispers, "Now we wait for spring." You nod, but you both know the light is already returning, one sliver at a time. By the time you wake the next morning, everything feels quieter. Not just the sleepy kind of quiet that lingers after a feast day, but something deeper, like the village itself is exhaling, the bells are still, the square is empty. Even the birds seem too hungover from Epiphany to bother chirping. You pull on your cloak and step outside to find frost curling up the edges of your boots like pale lace. The sky is a dull pewter colour, the kind that promises snow again, though it hasn't yet decided whether it's worth the effort. Today is the end of it all. Not the dramatic fireworks kind of end, a softer one, the last embers of Yuletide. The villagers call this day a dozen different names: 12th day, 13th night, or in some corners, burying the green. It's the time when the holly comes down from the beams, the ivy is pulled from the doorways, and the Yule log is burned down to its final glowing coals. The decorations that made the dark beautiful are now too dry to be trusted, too brittle to pretend they're still living. They've served their purpose, kept the spirits sweet, marked the days with green life in a dead landscape and reminded everyone that spring would return. But now they must go. You wander through the village and see it everywhere. Hands pulling pine branches from rafters, children plucking red berries from garlands and popping them into baskets with solemn ceremony. A boy walks by carrying a bundle of scorched oak wrapped in twine, the last chunk of the Yule log. "We saved the ashes," he tells you. "Good luck for planting, keeps the crows away." In one house, an old woman takes down a wreath of dried herbs and quietly snips it into pieces. She drops half into the hearth and hands the rest to her granddaughter. "Burn some," she says. "Bury the rest under your doorstep. Keeps death from sniffing around come spring." You're not sure how literal that is, but you nod anyway. There's a bit of sweetness in the air. The fire still burns, but it's lower now, crackling rather than roaring. The wild joy of the feast days has faded into a kind of thoughtful calm. People speak more softly, laugh a little slower. You catch fragments of stories told over the dismantling of decorations, of last year's snowstorm, of the time the goats stole the wassail bowl and got drunk in the priest's garden, of the cousin who finally married that red-headed girl from the next village over after declaring for years she had witch eyes. This is where the memory-making happens, not during the dances and the feasts, but in the winding down, in the little acts of closure. Someone carefully folds the paper crown from the king cake and tucks it into a box for next year. Another person smooths out a scrap of cloth from the manger scene and murmurs a prayer as they pack it away. These aren't just holiday chores, they're rites, little funerals for the season that has passed. You're invited into a cottage to help take down the goat bones. No one explains what they are at first. You assume wrongly that it's a joke, but no. In one corner of the room there hangs a mobile-like structure made of actual bones, loosely tied together and decorated with bits of ribbon and red thread. It's the Julbok, someone explains, old tradition, before the saints and the kings. You help untangle the strands and gently place each piece into a cloth-lined box. We don't burn the bones, the woman says. Too risky, though. We bury them in the ashes so they remember to come back. Not everything is so serious. One family turns the clean-up into a game. They divide the room into teams and race to see who can take down the most ivy without breaking a twig. The winner gets the last apple from the winter stores. The loser has to serenade the chickens with a love song. You learn this the hard way. In the square, a few villagers have gathered around a small intentional fire, not the communal bonfire from Christmas Eve, but a gentler one, a brazier, almost ceremonial, where the last scraps of the Yule log are fed slowly into the flames. People toss in bits of their own, sprigs of dried holly, notes written on parchment, a sliver of wax from the midnight mass candles. One woman tosses in a single blackened wishbone. "Didn't get my wishbone," she says, smiling. "Let's try again next year." There's a silence around the fire that isn't heavy, just full. Full of all the moments that can't be neatly boxed up and labelled. The smells, the half-remembered jokes, the feeling of falling asleep while carols drift through the cracks in the walls. You stand there for a long time, warming your hands, watching the smoke drift up into the pewter sky. Someone sets down a small bundle wrapped in linen beside you. You glance over, curious. "What's that?" you ask. The man shrugs. "Last year's spirit. We let it go now." He picks it up, tosses it into the flames. The fire hisses, flares and settles. No one explains further. No one needs to. That evening the ashes are collected in little pots and jars. Some are scattered over the fields. Others are sealed and placed above doorways or under floorboards. Protection, people say. Remembrance. The children draw circles in the soot and tell stories about what they'll dream of tonight. "I'm going to dream about the bread fox," one announces, "and the snow giant with jam for blood." You just smile, and then, just like that, the season is over. The greens are gone, the garlands packed, the bread fox presumably back in the woods. You sit by the fire that night, surrounded by stillness, and it feels like sitting with an old friend who's just announced they're leaving in the morning. There's no fanfare, no final carol, just a quiet fade-out, the kind that leaves behind the ghost of a sundial and the faintest smell of pine. Historians might call this the epilogue of the 12 days, the tail end, the bit people forget to write about. But for the villagers, it's vital. You don't just open doors to let the light in, you have to close them too. Gently, deliberately, with thanks, with ritual, with goat bones and ash. That night you sleep with a pinch of those ashes tucked into your pocket, just in case. You don't believe in all of it, maybe, but still, when the fire whispers one last crackle before going out, you nod in the dark and whisper back, "Thank you." The days are beginning to stretch again, barely, but enough that you notice. The mornings come with a slightly earlier blush. The twilight hesitates just a little longer before surrendering to night. It's not spring, not yet, but the sky remembers how to hope. Snow still blankets the thatched rooftops and clings stubbornly to the muddy lanes, but you can feel something shifting. The worst of winter's grip is loosening. And with the end of the Christmas season behind you, the village breathes differently. Calmer, quieter, but not empty. People have returned to their usual rhythms. Bread is kneaded with fewer spices. The goats are no longer wearing hats. The Lord of Misrule has gone back to mucking pig stalls. The Yule log has long since turned to ash, tucked into corners and scattered across fields with reverence. But beneath all that, beneath the routine and the rhythm, something lingers, a flame that didn't go out. You're invited to a home near the edge of the village, one you haven't visited before. The couple there is older, hands like worn leather, backs slightly beard from decades of stooping to soil and lifting pots and hauling buckets. Their cottage is plain but warm. As soon as you enter, you're greeted by the smell of honey and wood smoke and something roasting gently on the hearth. "Sit," the old man says, not unkindly, just with the efficiency of someone who doesn't waste words. You do. They're preparing a meal to share. Not a feast, nothing grand. Just a stew of dried beans and barley, bits of preserved onion, a piece of salted pork that's been hiding in the cellar since November. But there's a candle lit beside the hearth, taller than most you've seen, and carved with symbols, circles, stars, lines that curve into spirals. You ask about it. The woman glances at it, then shrugs. Just something we light once the season ends, so the dark knows we're not scared of it. She tells you that the candle will burn until it runs out, that they don't snuff at it. Let it choose when to go, she says. That way, the light keeps its dignity. Outside, the village is slowly remembering what it means to live through winter, without the distraction of revelry. Roofs are patched, cellars inventoried, hens poked into laying again. But in the evenings, when work quiets and the hearth calls, the stories still come out. Not the carols or mystery plays, not the absurd tales of mummers and drunk goats. No, these are the long stories, the deep-rooted ones. You sit with a group of elders one night, passing a flask of something that tastes suspiciously like it used to be an apple. One man tells a tale of the first Yule fire, how the people lit it not to chase the cold, but to invite it in, to show it they weren't afraid. Another tells of a spirit called Tharn, who watches over those who never get invited to the feast. And how you must leave a crust on your plate at the end of every meal in case he visits. It's not charity, she says. It's just being polite. The stories are quieter now, less spectacle, more marrow. They're not told to entertain but to remember, to pass something on. One man, eyes misty with Eidans smoke, says, "You forget how important it is, what we do at Christmas. It's not just a holiday, it's how we remind the dark that we're still here, that we have names, that we still sing." He pokes the fire for emphasis. Sparks leap, startled. There's no more wassailing, no more snowball battles in the square. But when you walk home that night, you catch someone humming under their breath. A tune from the Christmas Eve carols. The melody is frayed now, worn around the edges, but still there, still warm. You pass by the chapel and see a single candle still flickering in the window. Not a ritual anymore, just habit, a soft defiance. Even the children, who once tumbled through the streets like human versions of falling stars, are quieter. Not somber, just settled. A group of them sit near the baker's oven one afternoon, warming their toes and whispering to each other. One of them turns to you suddenly and says, "Do you think the sun knows we missed it?" You don't have an answer for that, but you want to say yes. You want to say that all the singing, all the greenery, all the fires, they weren't just for the villagers, they were for the sky too. For whatever watches, from above or below, to know that this tiny snow-choked place was full of people who knew how to love in the dark. That evening, you help carry the last bits of pine and holly to the edge of the fields. They are not burned now, just left, returned to the land. Some believe it's an offering, others say the earth simply reclaims what it loaned. A child presses a handful of pine needles into the ground and whispers something in a language you don't recognize. No one corrects her. Maybe the trees understand. When you return to the square, the fire is burning again. Not for a festival, not for ceremony, just for warmth. Someone passes you a bowl of porridge, hands covered in soot. "You made it," she says. "Not everyone does." And she doesn't mean just surviving the cold, she means the whole thing, the season, the weight of it, the brightness and the shadow it dragged behind it. You nod, you take the bowl, you sit. Historians might record the dates, the customs, the liturgical meanings of the Christmas season, but they'll never quite pin down this feeling, the fire that lingers, the way the songs echo long after the singers sleep, the way the warmth nestles deep into your ribs and says, "This matters," not because of what you lit or sang or ate, but because you did it together, and because you did it in defiance of the dark. That night you lie beneath your wool blanket and hear the wind begin to rise again. But now it doesn't sound as lonely. It sounds like a song, maybe one the world is singing back to you. There's a silence to the village now, not empty, not hollow, but something fuller, like a bell that's been rung and now rests, still humming from the inside. The 12 days are behind you. The mummers have vanished back into their cottages, the last crust of the king cake has gone dry, and not a sprig of greenery clings to the beams. The world has exhaled, and here you are, standing in the lane, not sure where your feet are about to take you, but somehow not in a rush to find out, because before the seasons turn again, there's still one last thing to do. Walk through it all one more time. The morning is cold, cold enough that your breath looks like smoke and your fingers complain even inside your mittens. But you walk anyway, past doors marked with chalk now faded by frost, past hedgerows sagging under the weight of old snow, past the chapel with its single window glowing like a star, trying to remember how to shine. The lane curves gently through the village, and you follow it like a thread tugging you backward and forward at once. You pass the cottage where you first heard the carolers, voices trembling but joyful, like candlelight made sound. The memory rises without effort. Wool scarves, cracked boots, children slipping on ice and laughing through the fall. You remember the door that opened with a groan and the warm hands that offered you cider spiced with something sharp and sweet, and the fire that popped in welcome. A little further down, the manor house looms in stillness. The great feast is over, the last goose eaten. The fire logs in its hearth have turned to cold stone, but even in the quiet you can almost hear the echoes. Laughter, clattering knives, the boom of a tankard against wood. You recall the soft glances between servants, the drunken cousin trying to dance a reel with the pig, the scent of rosemary roasted on meat so tender it fell apart at the glance of a spoon. The village square, once a chaotic whirl of mumming and snowball fights and children shrieking at the sight of the Marie-Louise, now sleeps under a blanket of white. A single scarf, half buried, waves from a fence post like a tiny flag of surrender. You imagine the goat that wore it, dignified, confused, faintly drunk, being led away by a girl singing an off-key love song about hooves and hay. That happened, probably, maybe, doesn't matter. But the point is, you were there, and then the chapel again, where the boy bishop once stood on a stool and declared cake a divine rite. The same chapel where you heard the midnight bells toll under a ceiling black with soot and stars. You remember the silence there, the kind that hummed with everything unsaid, the kind that only exists when people breathe together, eyes half closed, hearts cracked open just wide enough for the light to leak in. A few paces more and you reach the field's edge. The woods yawn beyond, dark and old. You remember the hunt, the stories told around the fire about beasts with silver teeth and eyes like polished bone, the way the villagers leaned into those tales, not to scare themselves, but to remember that the forest has rules, and so does the dark. You weren't afraid, not really. Or maybe you were, but fear tastes different in winter. It's part of the warmth, part of what makes you reach for another hand in the cold. The wind picks up as you climb the little rise where the mummers made their final fire. The ashes are scattered now, blown into hedgerows and caught in old nettles, but the circle remains faintly outlined in the snow. You stand there for a moment, letting the wind tangle your hair and press cold against your cheeks, and you listen, not for voices, not for music, but for memory. And it's there, all of it. The bread fox and the snow giant, the choir boy who forgot his lines and shouted "Saint Goose" instead of St. George, the man who paid his debt with turnips carved to look like coins, the girl who found the bean and ruled as queen of pigs for one glorious afternoon, the grandmothers who whispered it to the fire, the child who left salt for the dead, the fool who slipped in the cider and blessed the cat instead of the priest, the flickering warmth of 100 little fires, the way they held back the night, not by fighting it, but by inviting it to sit down and share a bowl of stew. And now the path turns you home again, back to the cottage where your boots sit by the hearth, still drying from yesterday, where the stew is already bubbling, thin but fragrant, where a single sprig of dried rosemary still hangs above the door, long after the others were taken down. "We left it up," your host says, shrugging. "Didn't feel right to take all the magic down." You nod, understanding. Some things don't need to end just because the season does. You sit by the hearth as the fire pops gently, and outside snow begins to fall again. Not the frantic kind, the kind that drifts. Soft, steady, wrapping the village in a final hush before the grind of daily life returns. Historians will note the end of Christmas as a date, a deadline, January 6th, Epiphany, or even the 7th, depending on the calendar, but they'll never be able to describe this gentle tapering off, this soft descent from magic to memory. The part where no one sings anymore, but everyone hums, where the candles are gone but the wax stains remain, where the stories are over but the laughter still echoes if you listen just right. You lean back, close your eyes, feel the warmth soak through your bones, and you really know that the season didn't die. It just went to sleep, waiting, resting, tucked under snow like a seed. It'll wake again. It always does. So now you're lying there, eyes half shut, listening to your own breathing and maybe the soft spin of a fan or the hush of wind against your window. The story's done. The lights have dimmed. The fire's nothing but a smudge of warmth in the back of your mind. But something's still with you, humming just below the quiet. Not the noise of it all, not the songs, or the misrule, or even the goat bones. It's the feeling you can't quite put into words. It's the way time slowed down in that village, how people gave meaning to even the smallest gestures, a pinch of ash, a broken loaf, a whispered blessing scribbled in chalk. You might not have a boy bishop traipsing through your neighbourhood, or a Mary Louise at your door demanding ale and rhymes, but the thread is still there. Woven into the way you light a candle in the dark, how you hum a song when you're alone, how you hold on to a tradition, even if you're not sure where it came from. These stories weren't about grandeur or perfect moments. They were about people just like you, surviving the coldest part of the year with whatever scraps of joy and silliness they could cobble together. And now, as you drift into sleep, maybe you carry a piece of that with you. Maybe it settles next to you like a patchwork quilt stitched with memories you didn't know you had. So close your eyes, let the snow fall where it may, and rest in the glow of a world that knew how to find light in the deepest dark, then passed that skill down, all the way to you,